Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Matt. I will be your alchemist this evening. Welcome back to the Tavern, and I am here with Captain Garrett of the Swords and Starships channel. Hello, hello, Garrett. I was about to say hello, Captain, but we just went over this.
Ahoy, Matt. Yes, Captain Garrett here of the channel Swords and Starships on YouTube, Rumble, and Locals. Happy to be with you. Permission to come aboard, sir.
Permission granted. Permission granted, Mr. Garrett. I was about to say, I was about to say for those people who don't know who are you? But we've sort of introduced you properly there. But we'll do it anyway. For those who don't know who you are, who have not been acquainted with your channel just yet, who are you and what do you do?
I am Captain Garrett of the channel Swords and Starships. So my channel is focused on entertainment, nerd culture, basically all the things I love, like sci-fi, space travel, fantasy stories. That's games, books, movies, all of it. And I also really into historical, and so you'll probably get a lot of that, a lot of historical action adventure kind of things as well on my channel. And I mostly am just doing reviews and commentary. And my goal is always to find the positive, the things I love. Unfortunately, we run into a lot of the things that are less than lovable in current entertainment. So I have my bones to pick as well. So I launched this channel in January. We're growing fast. We are at, I believe, last I looked, I try not to look too much for vanity's sake, but I'm at about 650. So 660.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, working almost to 1,000, working on getting monetized. And also I'm also trying to build a Discord and a local, so I don't want to throw out too much, but yeah, that's my main flagship is Swords and Starships on YouTube. And I'm also an Iron Age creator. I'm a novelist. I've written 2 books. The actual artwork on the channel is from my books. Thank you. Oh, you're Johnny on the spot there, Matt. Yeah. So yes, these are my books, Blood and Oak. It's a 2-book series so far. I plan to write more. The first one, Blood and Oak, and the second one are basically what I like to think of as one complete season of this swords and sails swashbuckling adventure. It takes place in 1803. It's about a young American sailor, John Sullivan, in the early days of the U.S. Navy, fighting a war against the Barbary pirates. And I believe my tagline, if I should be able to remember it, when his sister is kidnapped and sold into slavery by the Barbary pirates, young, daring sailor John Sullivan embarks on a suicidal quest of rescue and revenge.
Excellent. Excellent stuff there. And of course, it's right here where people, you'll see people watching. It's right there. That is Blood and Oak. That's the first one right there, the chap with the sword. All right.
Absolutely. And it's very much in the vein of Patrick O'Brian or the Aubrey Marturin novels, of which I'm a great fan. I'm a great fan of Hornblower. I'm a great fan of, honestly, British naval history is like one of my favorite. I consider British naval history really as the tradition that informed the American Navy. Actually, the American Navy almost completely copied the British model of how they did everything in the Navy, which makes it easy to research, because if I research the British Navy, I kind of understand how things work in the American Navy. Although the ship design mostly came from the French in those early days. But it actually, I think, informs Star Trek maritime decorum, because that tradition of maritime decorum became kind of what you see in Battlestar Galactica and what you see in Star Trek. And so, in a way, I kind of go back to, that's my favorite historical era of maritime travel.
Well, that's the perfect segue, because Star Trek is one of the things that I wanted to talk about with you here here today. And also, I guess sci-fi in general, we've touched upon it a little bit in the pre-show. So I think for the first time, I think we'll before we get into anything sort of new, we'll go over good stuff. So for the first time on the channel, I'm going to issue a spoiler warning for Star Trek Picard Season 3, because it is
spoiler
ongoing.
alert.
and I wouldn't do that if it sucked. So if you haven't seen Picard season 3, I will I'll put up a thing somewhere when we start talking about it properly. If you haven't seen it, I would say go see it, and I'll put a time skip in, because we will talk spoiler. We'll probably talk fairly in depth about it. But let's start with Star Trek, the proper Star Trek. Where does it begin for you? Where does your kind of journey with Star Trek begin?
Star Trek: The Next Generation, I would say. I wasn't raised on the original series. I was a bit of a snob when I was a kid. I wanted better special effects. And so for me, that was what attracted me. But I would say I was probably like in, I don't know, maybe 6th or 7th grade when I started watching the reruns on TV. And I loved it because I love science. I've always loved science. I've loved the idea of space travel. I've always believed our destiny is in the stars as a species. I very much agree with Elon Musk on that. We have to have something to reach for to better ourselves as a species. And, you could get in the weeds about, is it even possible? I believe it's possible. We'll figure it out eventually. Maybe 1,000 years from now, maybe 100 years from now. I don't know. But we'll figure out how to get there. And we don't destroy ourselves in the meantime. But Star Trek: Next Generation very much tapped into all of that. So that's where it begins for me. But then that led me down the rabbit hole of the Kirk films, which I loved. And, so I'm a great fan of the original series. And I've watched a selection of the best original series episodes, I would say. And I'm tuned into all of the lore. I consider all of the Kirk adventures absolute canon. That is the father. That is the father of all Star Trek, really. And Kirk is the original Star Trek character. So my favorite is definitely Picard. That was my favorite character, and we'll get into that, I'm sure, in just a second. And then Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise. Those are what I call the original 5. Those to me are all true Star Trek. I love them all dearly in their own ways, for their own reasons. And everything after the end of Enterprise, and I would say Star Trek Nemesis, I think, was maybe the very last thing they ever made, or was it Enterprise? I think Enterprise. I think
it was Enterprise. Yeah.
So
Nemesis, I believe, was 2002.
Yeah. Everything starting with the J.J. Abrams movie in 2009, which I will admit, I did like J.J. Abrams' movie somewhat in the beginning, because I didn't know where it's like Force Awakens. I liked Force Awakens. Whoa, little did I know. And that was kind of what it was with the Abrams movie. There was lots I didn't like, but now in retrospect, that was the death of Star Trek from that point.
Okay. So I think from my sort of history with it, I think I pretty much was raised on it. I think my earliest memories kind of are Star Trek, of watching it on TV with my dad usually. And I think for me, the first was The Next Generation as well. I had like sort of select episodes of The Next Generation that we'd recorded on VHS, and I would just watch them over and over. I think Deep Space Nine and Voyager kind of came after that. It was all in that sort of period of I think like late 90s, early 2000s.
They launched Deep Space Nine right about season 6 of Next Generation, I believe, if memory serves. That was about when it came in. There's even an episode where Bashir comes on the Enterprise and meets Data, which was cool. And there's another crossover in Deep Space Nine with some Enterprise characters coming over. And then Voyager launched like 2 years after, I think 1 or 2 years after Next Gen wrapped. And so Voyager's like 1 season ahead of Deep Space Nine. Anyway, so there was like a period where it was peak Star Trek. There were multiple Star Trek series. That was a great time to be a Star Trek fan. Conventions were popular. There was lots happening in the Star Trek world. It was all interconnected, which at that time I think was a big deal, because Star Trek itself is very, very much kind of an anthology show in its original form, because every episode sort of resets the status quo. But there were these little nods in Deep Space Nine to tell you that, yes, everything you saw in Next Gen is happening in this universe. Everything you're seeing in Voyager is happening in the same universe as Deep Space Nine. And what you saw in the original series is the history of this world. I think as fans, that was cool. And I don't think that was maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think that was super common back then. Now with the MCU and all that stuff, that's super common, but I don't think it was back then. And it was cool to have that.
Yeah, well, each show would kind of set up the next one. So I think TNG set up the Bajorans and the Cardassians, which then got carried over into DS9. Then both of them kind of set up the Maquis, which carried over into Voyager. I think both TNG and DS9 did a far better job with the Maquis than Voyager did. Because the
what do you think about where do you think Voyager went wrong on that? I'm curious.
They completely ignored the concept for like the majority of the show. I feel like, ironically, I think they would make Voyager better today than they did then, because I think there were more constraints budget-wise on Voyager. I think that the concept they sort of overreached with the concept than what they were necessarily capable of doing in terms of effects and things. You could have done it. I don't think that excuses the writing side though, where you have these two disparate crews that ideologically are at odds, and they should have been more at odds, but they were only at odds in like a couple of episodes. For the most part, there was just no issue. They just gelled and they were straight. And I suppose that's the aspirational aspect of it, like the more kind of Roddenberry aspect. But at that point, we'd had DS9 for a couple of seasons, and we'd seen that everything wasn't necessarily rosy and everything wasn't necessarily perfect. I feel they could have explored that a bit more and have them kind of pull together organically. In the situation.
I take your point. I take your point on this, and I don't totally disagree. Because you're right, it is a little bit convenient that the Maquis in the beginning of Voyager, they just kind of, okay, we're in Starfleet now. There were some great episodes in that first season where Chakotay has to literally punch a guy who's trying to kind of rebel against the Voyager crew, and he's even almost plotting mutiny. And Chakotay, I kind of see as the linchpin to that, because if it weren't for Chakotay, and if it weren't for Janeway's very smart decision to make Chakotay the first officer, I don't think it would have worked. I think was kind of the point they make in that first season. They do. But see, I think that's part of the episodic nature of it, that they have to establish the status quo as quickly as possible. And I'd say that's the weakness of the old way of doing Star Trek shows. But one thing I will say in defense of that, of the Maquis being so amenable, obviously they're in the extreme survival situation, but more than that, this gets to what's wrong with Kurtzman Trek as well. In Star Trek, even kind of the worst of humanity are way better than most people in our time, right? They're more enlightened. Even bad people, maybe bad people is the wrong way of putting it. Even humans that are doing really bad things, or maybe they're doing very violent things, still have a code of conduct that is at a higher level than people in our time. Just as how even someone who's probably kind of a jerk in our time, if they went back to, say, maybe the 1500s, would be appalled, I think, by some of the practices of that time. Like, you can't burn someone for being a witch, So my attitude is that, like, let me give you an example of this. There's the episode in Voyager with Captain Ransom, who is literally murdering life forms to extract this substance that allows his ship to go faster. And they kind of, and he's really the villain in the whole episode. And they sort of established that it was sort of a slippery slope. He didn't intend to be a murderer at first, but just one bad choice led to another, and now he's just in it, and he can't get out of it. And the
first one was an accident, right? The first creature that died accidentally, and they discovered, we can go really fast using whatever's in there.
And then it was kind of like one bad moral choice. We're in for a penny, we're in for a pound. And by the end of the episode, he changes his mind. Janeway reminds him of his duty as a Starfleet officer. And in the end, he sacrifices himself to redeem himself and do the right thing. And there's loads of other characters in Star Trek that I could point to that are like that. Even though they're bad and they're doing bad things, they still will stop at a point that's not quite absolutely psychopathic. And I think, to me, the Maquis are not really terrorists in the way that we think of terrorists. They are in disagreement with the Federation's policy, and they are freedom fighters, but they're still people of the Federation. They're doing this for a moral purpose, and so they can be persuaded out of that. That would be my defense.
Well, I agree. I mean, the concept behind them is really, really strong, to the point where I would like to see, one thing I really would like to see from Star Trek in general is to see just how normal people live in an extended kind of series. Because though the Maquis were effectively just normal people that were caught up on the wrong side of a border drawn up in a treaty light years and light years away. They were just basically just stuck in the middle and used as a make weight, and they didn't appreciate that, obviously, and they were living under the thumb of Cardassians, and Cardassians felt the same way. The border conflict sort of erupted into this, I guess it did end up being a war, sort of a war on a small scale, but it ended up being a war. And their reasoning for getting to where they got is perfect, is like a perfect sequence of events that was avoidable if Starfleet had kind of conducted themselves better. And it's one of those, they were a great device, I think, in the Star Trek universe that showed this isn't, utopia has its costs and it has its people who get kind of brushed aside in favor of the utopia and in favor of kind of peace at all costs and peace in our time. And they're not going to like that necessarily. And I agree, like,
well, I think my understanding of the story was that essentially the Federation was in a kind of an impossible spot, and they drew up this treaty with the Cardassians. That all it did was it said, okay, you can have this planet, we can have that planet, and they came up with a compromise that was the best they could do to stop the war. And that meant that they had to give up a couple planets on the edges, and both sides agreed, okay, we'll pull our Cardassians out of these planets, you'll pull your people out of our planets. And what happened was the people living on those planets were like, that's not fair, this is our home, we're not leaving. And then one other part of it was that kind of the humans were honoring, the Federation people were honoring their side of the deal, but the Cardassians were doing things under the table, like terrorist attacks on some of the planets that were on the border. And they were
smuggling weapons and things like that.
Yeah, but they couldn't prove it, and so Starfleet wouldn't do anything about it. So the Maquis was twofold. It was A, we're not leaving, and that was a violation of the treaty because we didn't agree to this. And second, the Cardassians aren't acting in good faith. And so I thought it definitely added some moral complexity to the story.
Well, it's again like logical that they wouldn't leave as well. Because it's like they were colonists. They built their home on this planet. They've sort of, I don't know if they've mastered the elements. I guess maybe they terraformed it. Maybe they built something from nothing. And you would have your family's blood in the soil, effectively. But to make this life for yourself, and then and now you're being told you have to leave. It's like, it's perfectly logical and reasonable. They'd be like, nah, we're not going to do that. It doesn't matter if we're on the wrong side of a border now. We're not going to do that.
And I think utopia is a bit overstated in Star Trek. I think that, I don't think that was the original intent of the original series, was to say that Kirk was living in a utopia. I think it was more accurate to say he was an enlightened man in a more enlightened time when many of humanity's worst problems had been solved. And that problems that we can, we've solved the problem of witch trials, like literal witch trials. We've solved that problem. We no longer do the sink or float test for people, right? We've solved certain problems, like cruel and unusual punishment is no longer accepted in most civilized societies. We've done away with that, right? And I think it was the same thing. In the Federation, they had done away with a lot of humanity's problems. That didn't mean it was a perfect society or that there wasn't problems. Just from our perspective, it was more enlightened. And I think that sort of turned into, in the Next Generation, they kind of moved it more in the direction of it's a utopia and everything's perfect. And I think Deep Space Nine actually moved it back a little.
Yeah.
Deep Space Nine, yeah. I think Deep Space Nine kind of dialed it back just a touch and was saying this, Earth is a paradise, but not everywhere is. And I think that's the more accurate way to look at Star Trek. It's a much more enlightened civilization. It's optimistic. The problems we are wrestling with now have been solved, but that doesn't mean there aren't problems.
I think if I were to say which my favorite series is, I don't know if I could give you a solid answer, because it's either the original, Next Generation, or Deep Space Nine. It's one of those three, and I'm not sure which it would be. It depends which day you ask me, because they go together really, really well, I think. Like, the original series is the sort of the pioneer of it all, and it is more like, I think people forget that there's express like references to money in Star Trek. Like, you've earned your pay for the week, Scotty, and things like that. Could be the same, but also they talk about credits and things like that. And
they're building the no money thing is nonsensical. It's nonsensical.
Yeah. Weirdly, they explain it better in the Orville, but they don't explain it at all. It's
they make a very game attempt to explain it in the Orville, which I appreciated. I still think it's doesn't quite work. They say in the Orville that it's reputation. Your reputation is the most important thing, and that's close to an answer I can almost accept. In a way, if you're an ethical businessman, it's the same way, right? But I think that the problem is who decides what gives you a good reputation, and that's the problem. Right. Who gets to decide whether you have, if in a perfect world, your customers and the people you serve would decide. But I don't think we will ever live in that world. There will be other factors, such as what do the people in power think should be a good reputation. So I just don't buy in. Money is still the fairest way.
Yeah, well, it's like, I think they said it was reputation and skill set became the value system that they employed. And I mean, it's sort of a shorthand explanation, and then it kind of moves on, I think, after that. But with
and how does someone who is, addicted to drugs or something, how do they, in other words, that doesn't solve the problem of there would still be homeless people. There would still be people who choose not to have a good reputation, who choose to be layabouts and do nothing, or choose to be unscrupulous. How would having a good reputation as your currency solve that problem? It doesn't. There'd still be people who opt out.
Yeah, it's something that Star Trek doesn't really answer either, I've found.
No.
But which is why I want them to answer it. Which is why I want to see how normal people just live.
Do you think maybe it's better left unanswered? Because it's not that the money thing is dumb. I think they should, if they're not going to go with money, they should introduce a currency that allows us as viewers to understand transactions. That's all I ask. But in terms of explaining how this enlightened economics works, I'm okay with leaving it a bit in the realm of imagination, because part of it is that humanity we've just learned better ways of doing things. And I'm okay with just that concept and leaving some of that to the imagination.
I think in DS9 they explored it a bit with Sisko's family, with his dad and his son. They explored kind of how normal people get on,
which was cool. I loved that.
Yeah, very much so. And you've got those two. It helps that you've got those three actors, Cirroc Lofton, Avery Brooks, and I think Brock Peters was his dad. All of them are just on top of their game, and they're really selling that unit, and they're selling their own characters really, really well.
I consider Deep Space Nine the crown jewel of the Star Trek canon, because it expanded the world, and it expanded the concept of a captain as well, because we'd never seen a family man as a captain. And that was so, and just as you say, it showed us what normal people live like. There's a great conversation during the Dominion War when Sisko's talking to his father, and he's like, "You left my grandson in the hands of the Dominion." He's like, it was his choice, Dad. He's a man. I can't, there's nothing I can do about it. And then his dad's like, "Are things as bad as they say?" Because he's a civilian in this world. And Sisko's like, "Well, they're probably worse," and it's, I love that, because it's a moment of, this is how real people have to deal with things in this universe. So so here's my question. What do you think of Picard?
I like Picard as a character.
Oh yeah, I guess that's too broad. Star Trek Picard, the series.
Well, I try not to for 2/3 of it.
Yes.
So the first I watched the first episode of it, and I felt like I had just been spat in the like someone just spat in my eye, and I went, I'm not watching any more of this. This is an outright betrayal of the concept, and it's people twisting the concept to try and make their own thing. Partly that's the fault of Patrick Stewart. Partly that's the fault of
Yes.
Kurtzman and Goldsman and Michael Chabon, who are the idiots behind it. And it really that first one made me so mad. And I was like,
what was like one of the
this.
worst offenses in that first episode, if you recall?
So a couple of things. So first of all, they had like the Star Trek version of what they considered Fox News, which I was like, excuse me, what are you on about? The fact that Starfleet didn't help the Romulans evacuate Romulus, or they tried to, and then something happened, and then they just went, okay, we're not doing that now. So what? No, that's not something that happens.
And even in that scene with the pseudo Fox News, I guess that's probably I don't know if that's what they thought of it at. I kind of thought this is their CNN and they're trying to like lionize these reporters, but they didn't sound like reporters at all. It's the weirdest thing. That should be the easiest thing in any movie to get right. Make a reporter sound like a real life reporter. And it was weird. They sounded like an actor just spitting out expository questions. And really, the reporter is yelling at Picard in a way that even reporters that are hostile don't do. It's like, it was awful. So it was badly done, and it was awful in terms of the story.
No one knew who he was as well. At Starfleet Academy, no one recognized this guy, like Jean-Luc Picard. Really, like this legendary figure. No one recognized him at all. I don't know if it was in the first episode where the Admiral.
Yes, it was.
Tells him to fuck off. Yeah,
sheer fucking hubris.
And it was just like, what? What is happening? Like, I don't know if that was the first F-bomb I'd heard in a Star Trek episode, because I didn't get that far in Discovery either. I got like 4 episodes into Discovery, and I was like, I'm just going to watch the Orville instead.
You know, I would say one of the worst. I agree with all of those. There is that one line where he gets into Starfleet Academy and the guy at the desk is like, he's like, oh, Admiral Picard. Oh, nice to see you out and about, sir. And Picard's like, and apart at first, see, I think you caught on earlier than I did. I was more optimistic at first, and I was kind of letting some things slide because I did think that starting him on the Vineyard was in alignment with the end of All Good Things, right? Because in the All Good Things future, he was on the Vineyard, and I thought that was an interesting tie-in, and Data was part of his story. When I look back, I was seeing red flags, but I was ignoring them because I thought maybe I'm unfairly judging it. I was still very much kind of blue-pilled on Star Trek at that time. I wasn't, and it wasn't until about the episode, it's about 4 or 5, where Icheb is viciously killed sadistically. It's literally like it's out of a film like Hostel. It's such a gross scene. And I loved that character in Voyager. I loved that character. He's a small supporting character, but to just murder him that way so that Seven can have a reason to want revenge. That was when I was like, this show is garbage. This show is awful. And it got worse. I watched the whole first season, and you can't even believe the depths of depravity that show sinks to. It's unbelievable. And it wasn't until the second season I watched one episode. And that first episode, there was about 10 minutes where it looked like they were turning things around. You know, he's back on the Stargazer. He even gives kind of an order to someone, and it's obeyed. And it's like, oh, he just demonstrated a leadership quality. And then 10 minutes later, he's hiding behind the captain's chair as the Borg queen is attacking. And I'm like, oh my God, this is so off. It was, and then of course, they dump everything they had just established in that 10 minutes. They send him back in time into an alternate reality where he is a fascist dictator. I'm like, oh, I get it. Okay, we're supposed to now, we pretended this was Star Trek for 10 minutes so that now we can do what we really want, which is to portray the, dare I say, Trumpian future in which we're all fascists now. And Jean-Luc Picard is got a row of skulls on display in his study. Of like, oh, fuck off, show. It's and so
like,
bad.
And they're like famous skulls. It's like Gul Dukat's skull and Sarek's skull and Martok's skull. I'm like, oh, Jesus, okay.
That's what I mean when I say they abuse the lore. They abuse it because, there's no logical reason why Picard is the one slaying all these famous characters, and you're not even doing anything with that story. There's nothing, and there was literally no point to yeah, well, all right, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but my point is, so you kind of sniffed out, right? I would just add to what you're saying in that first episode. Soji exploding in a fiery explosion in the beginning is there's so many layers with what's wrong with that, but it was just awful. It was, in terms of how it makes you feel, you're just like, why did she just explode and we get to watch her die at a fiery death in front of Picard for almost no reason, and just there's all these vicious Romulans. They turned it into Game of Thrones in space. That's really what they did with Picard. They wanted it to be like Game of Thrones.
Well, that's what they did with Discovery, and I was just like, so I could tell that's what they were doing with Discovery 4 episodes in, because they were trying to do like a Federation arc and like a Klingon arc, and it was just so like that show was that was where I was still a little bit I was like, I'm gonna give it a shot, give it a chance. I feel like
me too with Discovery.
I feel like just by the casting, I know where you're going with this, but I'm going to give it a chance. And I was sort of encouraged at first because I thought, like, in my head, Sonequa Martin Green was like a perfect character to have the focus on, the perfect actor for like a leading role.
Yes, I liked her very much in Walking Dead, and I thought she could have the energy of a Star Trek captain.
Yes. Well, I thought because she was playing I think lieutenant commander in the first.
Yeah, she was playing a first officer, and I kind of always viewed it as she's on the path to captain. But yes. I felt she could be a leading character. I thought, but then I heard her name was going to be Michael, and I'm like, ugh. It's just that's so stupid. I don't care. Like, that director always names his character, or that writer always names his characters that are female a male name. It's like, oh, you're so clever, you're so great. So I hate that name.
Well, even with the name, I was like, okay, I'm just going to see where it goes, because it could go somewhere interesting. Because I picking her for like a POV character, that's something kind of new. It's usually an ensemble. So having someone with a POV, that could be an interesting thing, could freshen things up a bit. I think it's good that they're making her sort of a commander or a lieutenant commander. And they had Michelle Yeoh playing the captain. And I'm like, she is the perfect person to play a Starfleet captain. Like, that's perfect casting right there. Michelle Yeoh, and then you've got her, you've got Doug Jones, who is this experienced kind of character actor in makeup. And I'm like, okay. There's something
Would
here.
that be Saru?
Yes, yeah. Big, tall, gangly man, yeah.
Saru may be the only good character in Discovery, I think.
Well, they completely... I think it took about 5 minutes of Discovery, of the first episode of Discovery, before I went, ugh. So I think she, like, Michael Burnham, like, sort of, like, bumps him off of his console to do his job for him. And I went, oh no, you're not doing this, are you?
Full girl boss within 5 minutes.
and they were like, she is just she's the biggest Mary Sue. I even more so than Ray. She's such a Mary Sue. Like she does stupid things in those first two episodes where you would never let any other character get away with it, but she's like condemned for them, but then she's told that she was right all along the entire time for the rest of the series, like until episode 4 at least. And I was like, okay, I think I'm gonna just not watch this for a week and see if I'm compelled back to it. And I was never compelled back to it.
I slogged through it out of a kind of sad desperation that Star Trek, this is not happening. This isn't real. Like Star Trek isn't really going to be this bad. But yeah, that I remember my reaction to that first episode, and I was very optimistic at that time. I did not like that it was a prequel. That annoyed me immensely. I was like, after Enterprise was a good prequel, but I was done with them. I was like, I don't want any more prequels like Enterprise. I want the future of Star Trek. I want to see after the Dominion War. I want to see how thank God they didn't, though. Now I'm grateful they didn't. But yeah, that's what I wanted. But I'm like, all right, I'll check this out. And now I see why they did it, because A, it takes creativity to move the story forward. They don't have it. B, they are able to rewrite history, which these, and I don't know, however you may feel about this term, these woke assholes, this is what they love to do. They love to deface history. They love to deface art, and they love to throw soup on it. And this is their ability to throw soup on the toxic masculine character of Kirk by rewriting all of his history. I didn't see that in the beginning, right? But what happened, the very first moment in that show where I was like, this is not Star Trek. She's at this tribunal after she's committed mutiny. She started the whole Klingon war. The Klingons look bizarre in that show, which is awful. She's in front of this tribunal. It is the most melodramatic, almost like a Clockwork Orange kind of setting. It's almost this, there's this dark, echoey, there's this judge with this echoey voice, and he's like, Michael Burnham, you are condemned. And I'm like, and it's all dark and dour. I'm like, this is not the Federation. This is not how a tribunal is conducted in Starfleet.
It looked like a show trial, is what it looked like.
Right, like she's in a Soviet show trial. And then they put her on a transport, and where is she headed? To a work camp in the Federation. They've established in multiple series, in multiple episodes, that prison in the Federation, number one, there's no capital punishment in the Federation. That's absolutely established. Number two, prison is not prison in the way we think of it now. Prison is rehabilitation. You are usually on like a penal colony, and you're treated humanely, and you are given counseling and things to eventually bring you back into the Federation society. And they portray it as like she's going to a gulag to split rocks in a quarry. And I thought and she's in this, and I thought, you have never watched any of Star Trek Voyager. You've never watched any of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. You've never watched one episode of the first episode of Voyager. The first episode, we meet Tom Paris on a penal colony where he's in prison. It looks nothing like some dour Soviet work camp. So that show is filled with garbage like that.
I was going to say, like, Tom Paris in the first, he's outside in New Zealand in a lovely forest. He's like fixing a pipe. He's in the fresh air, and Janeway can just walk up to him and say hello. And like, in no danger. There's no guards, it seems. They're just there doing whatever they're doing, rehabilitative activity. And it's not, there's no rock breaking. It's just, they're just doing, I get exasperated even thinking about it.
Absolutely. And it goes back to my point that in Star Trek, even kind of the worst of humanity is usually not absolutely irredeemable. There's this book by David J. Wilson called My Life with Murderers. It's an interesting book. He's a professor that worked with prison inmates. I believe, forget exactly where it's. I believe it's in England. He worked in prisons with some of the most notorious like serial killers and stuff. And it's a really fascinating book, but he talks about how like he actually developed a program where some of the really worst of them, he would get them out of the prison environment and into like a group therapy setting. And like he has no illusions about who these people are. He's not like some naive, he understands they're very dangerous people that must be kept out of society. But he started developing ways of working with them that started to show signs of improvement in some of their behavior, right? And I just found it interesting because it's like maybe there are things we're doing that are wrong that we don't know, right? We're kind of reinforcing their behavior. And, and I feel like in the Federation, they've solved issues like that. They figured out ways of getting to people who, and there's very few people, I would imagine, in the Federation that are totally irredeemable, totally unreachable. And so to portray prison in this future is so dark. And Discovery, it does this every time. I'm trying to think of, it's a vehicle for their politics, really, is what it is, because one of the worst scenes in the whole show is in season 3. Yes, I watched some of season 3. They introduce a
brave man.
I guess she's a non-binary or a transgender character. I really can't ever make heads or tails of it. But she goes by they, them pronouns. And I'm thinking, imagine the absolute hubris of thinking that people in the future, speak and think this way, right? And the absolute hubris that everything we value in this current topical present moment in 2023 is so enlightened that people in the future will speak the way we speak in 2023. This is the complete opposite of what Star Trek posits. Star Trek posits that we're the ogres in our time. We are the Neanderthals, and they are not. And
but we will become that. We will become
right. Yes, we're building the future, hopefully. And there's this whole episode, and it's literally it's this dialogue between Stamets and his husband discussing her, but using her preferred pronouns. And this is the first time in my life ever that I've ever actually heard anyone use they, them pronouns, like as if to actually use them in that way. And it was the most
person's
cringe.
Not there, right?
She's asleep. She's fallen asleep at the console because she's been working so hard. And this conversation begins. And at first I honestly was confused because they said, they're awfully tired, aren't they? Yep. They've been working so hard. They really are special, aren't they? They are. And I'm listening to this and I'm like, well, who are they? There's only one person in the scene. I'm like, who are they talking about? And then I read, oh my God, they're using the pronouns. And then I figured it out. I was like, oh my God. And it was like, I could almost see the writers saying, okay, we need every version of the they, them pronoun used. How do we get every single way you could possibly use it into this dialogue? It was the most artificial, contrived, cringe, but it was literally a struggle session for the audience. It's like, shut your mouth, audience. This is what you need to be downloaded with so that you understand how to be an enlightened person. And first of all, it's garbage. It's like, I don't agree with you, show, and you can fuck off. Like, I don't care. I'm never going to use plural pronouns to dehumanize other people by referring to them that way. It's not how you refer to an individual.
It's so strange that, because I don't know how you would address that issue. I mean, they have addressed it in Star Trek before with in Next Generation, because they had the single gendered species, I think.
Yeah, there was the species that was monogendered, which that episode was interesting. It was kind of the reverse. It was a species in which it's taboo to identify with one gender or another because there's only one gender. So only another species looks at themselves as having two genders. And so the episode was about this character kind of falling in love with Riker and began to consider herself a she, and it's a female actor playing her. Yeah. So
but I think she already was. thinking of herself as a she, and then falling in love with Riker.
I guess you're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
I'm thinking like how
nowadays.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking like how nowadays I mean, it is a prescient issue, but if you're on, the problem is like, we don't know what the hell's going on with it right now. So there's almost no way to kind of solve it. We don't have the solution to it now. So, and the solution from their perspective is, well, these people are still going to exist and still going to, because my understanding was this character all still struggled with like dysphoria and things.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, it's the 30th. So how though? Surely by now, by the 31st century or something, this is no longer an issue, and this person is just going to be completely comfortable and secure in their identity, even if
yes, right. It's like, because the idea is that yes, the answer to your question is she is comfortable with it, because in her future, the modern 2023 belief about this has been fully accepted and embraced, and everyone agrees with it. And so yes, her life is perfect now. Yeah. That's the arrogance. That is the arrogant conceit of Kurtzman storytelling, and more broadly woke storytelling, because it's one political way of looking at the world being forced upon everything in Star Trek. And Star Trek is being used as a way of shaming. I kind of put it this way in one of my live streams. The thing about storytelling is you as the audience are observing the story. But in woke storytelling, there's a feeling you have, and I feel this. If you just listen for it, you will feel it in yourself. You are being observed in woke storytelling. You as the audience are being audited in woke storytelling. And you can feel it by the subtle invitation in a scene like the they-them scene I just described. The subtle invitation of that scene is for you to disagree and be recognized as a bigot. The subtle did I lose my camera?
Yeah. Carry on, though. You froze for a moment, and I'm like, oh, why is this?
See if I get it back. But the subtle invitation is for you to be viewed as a bigot, and then kind of shamed into right think. And I think the problem is Star Trek was historically allegorical. Here, I will just do this. Hang on a second. Just go to my...
Yeah, there we go. That'll do for now.
Yeah, we'll go to Avatar for now. Let's see if I can fix this. But Star Trek is allegorical in the sense that it invites both sides to consider an issue. And that episode we just referenced in Star Trek The Next Generation, it was portrayed as a morally complex story because Riker decides to intervene and help this person who he feels is being persecuted by his society. Picard disagrees, if I recall correctly. I believe Picard tells him, prime directive, we're not allowed to interfere. And a moral argument begins about what is our responsibility to help this person. And maybe, but then the counter argument is, but it's their society and they have a right to resolve this issue internally. And we don't have a right to interfere with that. So there's not this arrogant presumption on the part of the Federation that we're right, they're wrong. We need to educate them on why they're wrong. Whether we personally agree or not is not the issue. And this is what Star Trek has lost. This is why I think woke storytelling is so terrible, because you can have a story that explores a message like that issue, but your goal should be to tell it in a meaningful way and to allow dissent in the story that is not shamed, that is not meant to be disregarded. You should allow dissent that is meant to be considered by the audience.
I think the removal of all nuance is the offensive thing to me. It's like you're not allowing for any other solution. It's like it's our way or the gulag. That's it. Like in Star Trek especially, they always in the 2000s and the 60s and the 90s and the 80s, when it was all being sort of when it was in its prime, you had that nuanced idea of, okay, there are people who aren't going to like this very much. What's their point of view? Is there merit to that point of view? Or at least they'll treat it as if there's merit to that point of view. And then there is some kind of solution. Either there'll be a compromise or there'll be agreement. But it was always this is the thing that kind of it bugs me about Star Trek, especially where it's supposed to be smarter than Our Way or The Highway. It's supposed to have more, and also Discovery is like one of the most outwardly racist shows I've ever seen. Like it's shockingly
really?
so. Yeah.
Yeah. What makes you think that?
I've never seen. So this is particularly against people like us, Garrett. So,
oh yes,
um,
of European ancestry.
of European ancestry, where I don't think in any other episode. I mean, like there's like terrible episodes of Star Trek here and there where it does kind of creep things like Code of Honor, which they didn't mean it, but it was a bit iffy. But in this show, it's just outwardly you are wrong if you're a man. You are wrong if you are masculine. You are wrong if you feel this way. Any like a man who questions people on this show, well, we're just going to kill them because fuck them. Like the mansplainer guy in season 2. This is something like the most notorious thing, the mansplainer in season 2, who gets twatted by an
I
asteroid.
missed that.
What mid mansplain?
Oh, I think
like,
I may have seen that one.
Oh God, how are you? Why? And like they're making like comments about it, and they're specifically ostracizing a group. No Star Trek show has done that before. There is no precedent.
Well, it's not even, and yes, all the males are treated like idiots. Also in Strange New Worlds as well. Like Strange New Worlds is just as woke and garbage as the rest of it.
See, I haven't seen any of that, and I'm like, I haven't seen any episodes of it.
The first episode is garbage. It is garbage, and it's better garbage. It's less stinky garbage than some of the other stuff, and that's all owing to Anson Mount. He is the only reason that show has anything good about it. Everything else is crap, and there's so many examples of this. But
that's disappointing to hear, because I was thinking like maybe that I keep hearing the odd good thing about it, and maybe it's finding its feet in some way. I don't know. I've not been pulled toward it yet.
It's fruit of the poisonous tree. It's rotten because it's based on the same way of thinking that they have with everything. Perfect example. In the first episode of Strange New Worlds, there's a crisis involving the Prime Directive. A crew member, the first officer, as a matter of fact, has been captured by this pre-warp civilization, who are barbarians, of course, which is fine. That's common in Star Trek stories. But the problem is Pike wants to rescue his officer, but he's bound by the Prime Directive. So how does he do it? So they dress up as aliens. They're going to try to get there covertly. They get caught. He winds up going before the Prime Minister of this planet, essentially. And of course, it's a female, because every leader in Kurt's Trek, I'm fine with female leaders. I love Janeway. I'm a giant Janeway simp, okay? But not every leader is female in a real life situation, right? There's a balance. But anyway, of course, she's a female prime minister, and she is portrayed as flat out an isolationist, xenophobic, Brexit Trumpian type character right off the bat. She's portrayed as she's trying to suppress all this dissent.
Oh no, not Brexit Trumpian, not that.
Yes,
not that old chestnut.
So Anson Mount as Pike, who is great in this role and does have very Kirk-esque qualities to him, which is why I say he's the only good part about it. He gives this kind of typically Kirk-style, Picard-style argument in front of her of like why she's wrong. But unlike those other characters, it is one-sided. She is wrong. The show is literally portraying it as she is wrong. She is a bigoted, fascistic leader who is being educated by an enlightened person. And his arguments are vapid and superficial. They're not nuanced. He doesn't ever invite her to reconsider her position by actually persuading her. Instead, what he does, I swear to God, this is what happens. He plays footage of January 6th in a montage of Earth history. They literally have footage from January 6th in the montage of Earth's terrible, dark, like right next to World War II footage. And he's like,
how embarrassing.
Our culture oh, it's so cringe. He's like, our culture had these struggles as well, and we learned the dangers of blah blah blah. And the end of the episode is she's wrong. She ultimately, you know, is proven wrong. I forget the exact nuts and bolts of the ending, but the gist of it is she is wrong. She's proven wrong. She receives the lecture. Her struggle session is completed, and our hero is victorious. And it's like, this is not what Picard did. This is not what Sisko did. This is not what Janeway did. You know, there's great episodes where Janeway is up against one thing in Voyager's favor is that she was encountering cultures the Federation never encountered before. And she often was put in the position of having to respect laws she didn't understand. And there was an episode where Tom Paris or Harry Kim, I forget which, there's a couple of them like this, they get arrested according to local laws they've broken without knowing it. And Janeway disagrees with the law. The law is wrong and it's unfair and it's unjust. But she assures the leaders, our policy is we will not interfere with your laws. I will work within your laws to get my officers back. And they're like, you better. And she's like, we will. And I always admired that because the point is that the Prime Directive, you know what the Prime Directive is really saying? It's saying that we don't know better, right? By thinking we know better and interfering in another culture because we believe we're morally superior. You know, there's another word for that the woke people claim to not like, which is colonialism. Colonialism is believing we have we used to call it, you know, the white man's burden, they used to call it. But really the attitude that our civilization has the right way of thinking and that we're going to impart that upon your civilization. And the results are often disastrous because however well-intentioned we are, we make things worse. And the Federation recognizes this. And so even when the Federation is witnessing laws they consider unjust, they still take a posture of humility and deference of like, but it is your culture and we will, you know, respect that in accordance with our Prime Directive. And I think that is something Kurtzman-Trek does not have.
You mentioned colonialism there. I think it's telling that is basically what these people absent of any kind of creativity are doing to all these IPs. They're turning them into this homogenous blob of girl bosses and just nonsense. And like because there's no thought of tone or the theme of anything either. Like Star Trek has a specific tone, and it's quite a militaristic tone in a lot of ways. Like this is meant to be a navy, effectively an exploratory navy, but still a navy. And there's a chain of command. People treat each other with a degree of respect, and that is just absent from what I saw in Discovery. That was just absent completely.
Yeah, Nicholas Meyer, who directed, you know, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, and also Star Trek, I believe Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, which are my two favorite Kirk films, and 6 is actually my very favorite. He said, you know, when he came on board, Roddenberry took issue with Nicholas Meyer's attitude about some things because Nicholas Meyer was actually going full blown. This is a Navy, this is a maritime organization, and that's how we're going to portray it. And Gene Roddenberry said, no, Starfleet is not militaristic. Starfleet is not a military. It is a exploratory diplomatic organization. And Nicholas Meyer kind of met him in the middle. He said, well, I think it's at least as militaristic as the Coast Guard because it has a responsibility for defense. And they kind of were able to compromise on that point. And I think that's the fairest way to look at it is a military organization with a primarily diplomatic and defense posture. Their goal is to keep the peace and defend the Federation when necessary.
Yeah. Well, there's a chain of command on a cruise liner. Like
absolutely.
It's just we're a navy. There is a captain. There's a chain of command, but it's just this overly emotional mush. There's no respect to the senior officers. There's no deference at all. People are violating orders all the time. And it's just, I look at, like, people hate the JJ movies. The JJ movies got that right. They had a military, they had that naval tone.
Yeah,
like, obviously,
there's at least some of that.
there's some of that at least. Like particularly in Beyond, they hone in. I feel like how do you feel about those movies, the JJ movies?
So the first one, I would say I was kind of divided. I liked a lot of it. I liked that it was they got some of Kirk right in some of his way of doing things. I loved Bones. I thought Zachary Quinto's Spock was pretty good, and I really liked a lot of where they went with that. What I didn't like was it was just this kind of mindless action movie. And I sort of, at the time, I enjoyed the idea of bringing, I guess the way you might put it is bringing normies in, right? I enjoyed the idea that it was inviting a new audience to Star Trek and people were excited about it. People who would never watch Star Trek were talking about it, say, oh, that was so cool. And it was almost like being able to say, see, this is why I like Star Trek. But at the same time, I remember thinking, transwarp beaming, like that's bull crap. That doesn't do that, ruins the universe. And then when Scotty's looking up at the little short guy, he's like, get down, and the guy's got the tic tac eyes. I'm like, oh, that's stupid. And then there was Kirk being dropped off on a planet where when you start to actually think about the events of the story, none of it makes any sense plot wise. It's like, how could he be on a moon in full view of Vulcan, but they were at warp for 10 minutes and Leonard Nimoy's Spock is also there, so he can witness the death of his planet. Could you see the destruction of Earth from our moon? I guess you could, but this means that there's an inhabitable moon next to Vulcan. Like, all that lore starts
completely
to break down
unaffected by the destruction of the planet.
Also,
or the formation of a black hole.
Totally. And then it has the benefit of breaking the world with the fact breaking the future, because it suggests that in the future Romulus is destroyed and by a supernova that, quote, threatened the galaxy, which is not how supernovas work. Say one thing for Star Trek. Star Trek, the original 5 series, understood that it had fidelity to actual scientific possibility. I won't say that like it's like, yeah, everything in Star Trek is possible. Obviously not. And they bend the laws of science and they make stuff up, no doubt about it. But at least they made an effort to keep the rules as consistent with what we know about physics as possible. At least if there was something that was a magical technology, so to speak, there was an explanation for we had gotten around some kind of other physical law. And that was a clue to me in the J.J. Abrams Trek that these aren't people that think like that. They don't actually give a crap. These are the science people who really don't understand science and don't care about it at all, because if they did, they wouldn't have said something as stupid as a supernova threatens the galaxy, because they don't understand the scale of a galaxy or a supernova. So I thought that's a bad sign. And then the second film, I hate to admit this, but I did like it. There were things that were bad about it. I love Wrath of Khan, and I thought it was fun that they reversed it with Kirk dying instead of Spock, and I kind of enjoyed that. Looking back on it, I see the stupidity of it now, because it's like they totally undid it with Kirk coming back to life, which had to happen because of the plot. You couldn't have that be the end of this franchise. Star Trek Beyond was garbage, and I hated it.
Ooh,
Beyond
interesting.
I literally tried to watch it a second time and couldn't get through it. It's so boring. It's so awful.
Of the 3, it's my favorite one of the 3.
Really?
Yeah.
Tell me why. I'm curious.
Because it's a lot tighter in terms of the script. The story's a lot tighter. The crew kind of, at that point, the crew have basically settled into the roles. Like Kirk in that one is the most Kirk he's been in those 3 films. I think that kind of goes for everybody
on that. But for one caveat.
What's the caveat? Oh, well, okay.
I don't want to interrupt, but
we'll get to it. I think like it's not a flawless. The villain is very undercooked. Needed a bit more. That needed a lot more, really, considering where he came from. But they made a real effort there to kind of polish what was looking like an already pretty shiny turd with those 2 films. there was a lot better kind of setup and payoff, a lot better. I think the action was a lot better thought out than prior. Like they set up, they set up things like the bike and the kind of like the gooey gel stuff that he uses to like shield the crew. There's inconsistency there with how many of the crew there are, like on the planet, but it's the only good use in those three films of sabotage by the Beastie Boys. The only good use. They used it poorly in the other two movies, and that one they were like, okay, you've actually got a reason to use it, and the synchronize it, like the choreography of that was good. That kind of ending thing with the wave of tiny ships and things.
Yeah, and I don't recall hating that when I saw it in the theater, but I remember as I reflect upon it, Star Trek has always used kind of our world's music in it. I get I guess it's not a big deal. I do feel like sometimes though it's almost an attempt to say that Star Trek can't be interesting unless we inject our world into it. But okay, this is why I take issue with that film, and it's all in the first 10 minutes of it, really. Okay. And this is the caveat I was saying. Kirk is acting like Kirk until we get to this moment where he's on the ship and he's moping about melancholy about, oh, every day's the same. It's Groundhog Day. It's just one day goes into another. And in a sense, the concept of like space madness maybe had some possibility there. The idea of being a little bit of cabin fever, there might have been something you could explore there. But I think it was done poorly, because Kirk, that is not Kirk. This is what Kirk lives for. This is his purpose in life. And I think the Critical Drinkers review, he put it very well, which is, this is a man in the prime of his life doing what he was meant to do, born to do. Doesn't mean it's perfect, but he should by no means feel a sense of lost purposelessness. And when you compare this to Wrath of Khan, there's a similar feeling that Kirk is having in that film, but the difference is he's older and his life is kind of on the downhill part, right? He's getting older, he's not the man he used to be, and he senses that, and that's why he feels lost. When he's in his 30s and he's a fit commander, captain of a state-of-the-art starship. And the reason why that I think they wrote him this way in this film is because the people who've been writing Star Trek since 2009, as Robert Meyer Burnett put it, they don't love it, but also they don't have a worldview that is capable of writing optimism. They're not capable of writing a story about a fit commander who is doing what he was born to do. Take Maverick, Top Gun Maverick, for example. They could never have written Maverick that way. Maverick in that movie, he's got his bike, he's got his plane hangar he lives in because he loves it. He's flying, he's a test pilot, he's flying the most state-of-the-art craft in the world, he's pushing them to their limits, he loves his life. He loves his life. These writers can't write that way. They can't write a character and that's why they couldn't write Kirk that way. Kirk loves his life. Kirk loves life. All the Star Trek captains do. All of them. They love living. They love being alive. They love exploring. They love being in a ship. They love being with their crew. They love challenge. They love adversity. They love diplomacy. They are the best person on the ship. Every Star Trek captain is the best person on that ship, period. That's why they're the captain. And to portray Kirk as being melancholy and listless and wanting to almost give up on life is absurd, and it ruins the entire tone of the whole movie from minute one. And this is why I think they can't write Star Trek, because their worldview, and I don't just mean politically, I mean just spiritually, intellectually, their view of life is that we live in a dystopia. The human species is hopeless. It's Game of Thrones. We are all just violent apes bludgeoning each other, and it's only a matter of time. That's their attitude. That's why there's so much depression, and I need to learn self-love, and I need affirmation. It's like, this is why we're in this bizarre culture of constant narcissism, because these are people that are searching for meaning and they're not finding it. And so Star Trek, this is why Star Trek is so dear to my heart, because it used to give you meaning. It used to give you hope, because it was about characters who did have hope. Sorry, that was a long diatribe, but that's why I hate Star Trek Beyond.
No, I mean, I agree that applies to a lot of the modern Trek. It applies to modern Picard, which is such again a massive betrayal of him. But in Beyond,
season 1 and 2 for sure, but season 3 has changed the game.
Yes, it has. Yes. Well, Kirk in Beyond, though, I think they, with the new canon, with the sort of parallel canon that he's involved in, he's getting to, I think they go over it in there, where it's like he's going to be a year older than his dad was, and his dad died in service, and he's reflecting on, I think that's making him reflect on, like, I joined this on a dare and things like that. And I can see internally how he gets to that point. And I think the Beyond is about him being kind of reinvigorated and finding that love again of the adventure and the stars and getting out.
I'm okay with, I see your point there, and I'm okay with him. I think it's fine if he's melancholy for a better reason. And if the reason had been he's loving his life, he's in his prime, and he feels a bit of survival guilt maybe about, my father died. This, just make it, this is the day in his age that he died. And maybe that's giving him a sense of mortality, or he's wrestling with how much he misses his father, and he has the knowledge that there was an alternate history of his life in which he knew his father. Maybe that's making him melancholy. That would all be fine. The film specifically states, though, that Kirk is bored. That's really what it is. He's bored. He's bored with exploring space, and that to me is anathema to Kirk.
Well, I think that's what the log says, that things are feeling episodic, I think they say, and it's got the row of the gold uniforms, and I think, like, that's his log, but then they go into what's behind it with McCoy, and what's behind it actually is, I'm going to be older than my dad, and all that stuff. That's how I read it anyway. I think they could have explored it more. There are things in that movie that are undercooked that would have made it a lot better. That aspect of it, the villain as well. I think that kind of looking out into the void, and the void looking back, and the void not looking back at you, kind of being unaware. That's something that they tried with the villain, and they needed to do more with the villain. But I think you've got him and Kirk kind of paralleling there, and then you've got Kirk and Spock kind of paralleling, because Spock as well is thinking about leaving the ship because of Vulcan being destroyed and things like that. I think there's something there that they just needed a little bit more time with, to just peck at a bit.
I see where you're coming from. My attitude is, I think they lack. It's like the Rian Johnson vision of Luke Skywalker. They lack the ability to write a compelling story about a man who enjoys his life, right? Because when we talk about classic adventure tales, what are we talking about? We're talking about characters like Indiana Jones. We're talking about characters, I think of like Horatio Hornblower, I mentioned, was just more obscure, but like classic naval heroes that I like, most of them have a lust for life. They set out on an adventure because they want an adventure. And I feel like that's what we've lost with these characters. They're not able to envision a Luke Skywalker who still loves being a Jedi. They're not able to envision a Kirk who still loves being a captain. And it's not that I disagree in principle. As I mentioned, I initially liked the idea of cabin fever, space madness. I thought there was something tantalizing there. But I think it was the wrong character for it, and it was the wrong way to go about it. It would have been there's a great episode of Voyager I love called Night, and it's the beginning of season 4, I think. And basically Voyager has entered this area of space where they can't see the stars. There's no stars. And it's going to be 2 years of traveling through this void, basically. And it's so depressing that the crew is kind of becoming listless. And it is a cabin fever. And they're just in the holodeck screwing around because there's nothing to do. And Janeway has locked herself in her cabin, and she's basically delegated all the ship's command responsibilities to Chakotay, and she won't come out.
Yeah.
And she's depressed because she's thinking about, it's my fault we're in the Delta Quadrant. That is a good example of how to do this. But the minute that Janeway has a mission in that episode, the minute that like something is wrong, there's actually like an enemy to deal with, Janeway comes alive again. And she takes command again. She becomes excited again, and now she's ready to get to business. And to me, that was the key: is that a Starfleet captain is energized. They are energized by the exploration and what they're out there to do. And so for me, Kirk was being enervated by exploring space, and that is wrong for his character. Maybe right for another character, but it's wrong for his character, and that's my only objection to that.
I think there's something. I think this also might be why they've struggled going post-Dominion War. I think I really want them to, because what Star Trek has never dealt with, other than in sort of the odd episode, they've not really dealt with the idea of, we've just come out of something horrible and we need to find our joy again. And I thought they would do that with Discovery. That was the only thing, maybe, like, because they started off with the Klingon War and that. I'm thinking, once they get out of this, is it just going to become, is it actually going to say something? But thus far they haven't, until perhaps Star Trek Picard Season 3. So spoiler warning, everybody. If you haven't seen it, if you don't want to see it, I don't blame you. Because I think a lot of people feel very burned, including me. But so far, it's been pretty good. I don't know if I'm completely sold on it.
What do you think about it? How many? So you've seen all the episodes, right? Up to
6.
We're on 6.
Yep. Time of recording. Yep. Episode 6 is where we're at. I thought the first 3 were all right, and then 4 was a massive upward climb in quality, where I just went, oh, this is actually what we can do. And then 5 pretty much stayed up there, pretty much, and 6 is still sort of on that level. It's not dropped again, which is good. But there was a lot of, at the beginning, I was watching it and I'm like, okay, you're just throwing member berries at me. You're throwing an awful lot of member berries at me. I'm not exactly happy with that. I'm not unhappy with it, but it's a bit like, okay, you just feel like you feel like you're talking down to me a bit. But it got to a point where I was like, okay, so this is okay. So you've introduced your story now, where Crusher needs help, and she's contacted Picard, and we're kind of being reintroduced to everybody. Gradually, we're being reintroduced to everybody. Raffi was holding it down quite a lot. All the stuff on Metalas really, really dragged it, I thought.
What do you think of Raffi's character?
She's terrible. Until episode 6, actually. In episode 6, she kind of improved a bit. It's the most competent and the most likable she's been, even though they gave her a girl boss moment where she was like, gentlemen, let's get to it. Like, she had I need to remind the men of what we need to do.
So you're talking about the most recent episode, right? Where they're on when they're on I hated that.
Yeah.
I hated it.
I just went, can we not do that? But apart from that, it's been pretty good. It felt like Star Trek again, which is the main thing. I have a major gripe, which I'm hoping that, and this is almost, it will take a couple of stars off for me if they don't mention the Inner Light ever.
Oh, do tell.
So the whole point of this, so Picard, we met Jack Crusher. Picard has a son now that he didn't know he had. And the reasons for that are, I think, fairly reasonable. That he didn't know, that it was kept from him. And he has reason to be annoyed about that as well. So far, we have, aside from holding up the flute in the first episode, we're forgetting that he had a family. I mean, it wasn't strictly him, but it was him. To him, it was him because he lived it. He had a family. He had a wife. He had kids. He had grandkids. He had a moment there in that series in that episode, where he said, "I'd never needed kids."
Oh, you're talking about the inner light.
The inner light,
Next Generation.
If they don't bring that up at all, then we're gonna have a problem, because this is him actually having a kid. And I can see them maybe going towards it being kind of a reason why. I don't know. They need to bring it up. They just need to bring it up.
Well, to be fair, I have always felt that episode, and this is probably one of my gripes with how Star Trek was originally done. That is a brilliant episode where he lives this entire simulated lifetime. Like literally he lives an 80-year lifespan where he has a family, and it turns out it was all just memories being downloaded to him. And it was a great episode. It was one of the best episodes of the series. And they almost never reference it again. There's like 2 or 3 callbacks to it later in the series, but they almost never reference it again. And it's almost never referenced in the movies. So I will just say that I think that even the original Next Gen show kind of just dropped the ball on that. They almost never would talk about it. And I thought, geez, you basically, Picard has at this point lived a 200-year lifespan at this point. And they never. So yeah, that's a fair point. Even I'd kind of forgotten about that completely. Yes, I saw the flute. I remember that. That would, he'd almost be like a man who was always talking about 2 lives at the same time if he had really lived that. So to be fair to this show, the original show didn't really deal with that very well either, I think.
Well, they've had the movies certainly didn't. I think the movies are one of the biggest, were a massive misstep in terms of what they wanted to do with them. But it's only brought up in one other episode, I think, with where he has his romance. I think that's one Patrick Stewart actually may have directed. But he has his romance.
That was a great episode.
Yeah. A real kind of testament of what it means to be in command and be in command of someone you care for. It was
and they kind of I think what they went with is that Picard is such a private person that he never talks about it unless there's a reason to. But that only gets you so far in terms of explaining it.
In episode 4, right at the end, they have that reveal that Jack had actually approached him, sort of soft approached him before, and kind of asked him about if he'd had a family before. And or if he'd found time for a family ever. And there's a moment where he just sort of stews on the question before he says, "Starfleet's the only family I ever needed." I feel like maybe that's something. I don't know if I'm reading too much into it, but that's kind of what I do as a Star Trek fan.
Well, we could say it's a continuity error. I mean, Star Trek has never been immune from some continuity errors. I will say this show has been this, and when I say this show, I mean season 3 specifically, and disregarding season 1 and 2. It has been as faithful to the actual events of past series, not just Next Gen, but Deep Space Nine, Voyager. It's not just been using member berries, because yes, I had all those red flags in the first 2 episodes too, because I had shell shock from all the previous Kurtzman Trek, and I was like, uh-oh, I've been here before. Fortunately, it turns out that those bits of lore were being introduced for the most part, for like really good reasons that honored what had gone before. And the best example I can think of is the Changelings coming back was done in a way that did not undo what happened at the end of Deep Space Nine, because the end of Deep Space Nine was a beautiful ending. Odo goes to the Great Length, he resolves the conflict, he makes peace. And they're not undoing that by saying, well, the Changeling have changed their mind and now they're invading the Federation, and which would have been a Kurtzman way of doing it, a superficial, low IQ writer way of doing it. Instead, Terry Matalas is basically saying, no, we're still at peace with the official Dominion. However, there's a splinter group that won't accept the peace. And Odo has even warned us about it, is implied in episode 4 or whatever, I think. And that to me is using the lore in a way that honors it because they understand it. So when I look at Picard saying, oh, Starfleet is the only family I need, first of all, it's a lie. He doesn't actually mean that, which is part of the tragedy of that moment. Yeah. Because his son, who he doesn't realize is his son, takes that seriously and says, he means it.
My reading of that was, I didn't think it was a continuity error. I think like he's talking to these cadets and trying to like G them up. And he's sharing stories with them. And when Jack asks him that, it's like, I've been trying to G them up. I can't go into it. Like the whole point of this was, go out and go get them, Tigers, and all that. And it's like,
he's trying to get him to leave him alone so he can eat his lunch, basically.
And also it's, I can't go into this right now. And maybe I can't go into it because it's too painful to go into. And I was thinking like, because he pauses on that question and then gives the kind of pep up answer. I'm like, okay.
He gives him the company line.
Here. Yes, exactly. It's like, okay, there's something, you're doing something here. You are doing something. We just need it to keep, need you to follow through with it.
One could read into it that Picard does think about that family, but knows they weren't real, right? Because his experience in the Inner Light wasn't real. It felt real, and it was it was basically an 80-year-long holodeck illusion. So to be fair, he probably definitely has emotions bound up in it, no doubt. But does he view that as I actually had a family? I think it's fair to say he wouldn't, because in his real organic life, no, he's never had a family from his perspective. So my impression of this, I liked episodes 1 and 2, and I thought the only reason I wasn't throwing, more concerned is that Robert Meyer Burnett convinced me to watch this. I never would have watched it. I was boycotting it because I'm like, I won't let you do this to me. I won't let you suck me in with Riker and Geordi and all the rest, only to watch each of their characters be dismantled, deconstructed, humiliated. I won't do it.
I figured they would just bring in everyone back to kill him. I was like, I know what you're doing, and I'm not going to let you suck me in.
They would have Jake Skywalkered all of them, is what they would have done. They would have Jake Skywalkered every single one of them. And I knew that's what I believed was going to happen. And I wasn't going to let it happen again. And it was only Robert Meyer Burnett who'd seen the whole thing and is a credible source. And he made a very eloquent defense of the show, of this season. And I thought, okay, I will give it a shot. And there are problems in it, some small ones. There are things I don't like in it. But I will say, for the most part, it is night and day. It is absolute. The thing you said episode 4 was kind of when you were like, okay, this is definitely an improvement. For me, it was 3. It was episode 3, because the minute that Picard turns around and says, help, engage, and starts the battle, that moment was that episode 2?
That's
episode 2.
Yeah.
So maybe that's actually the moment. That moment right there at the very end of episode 2, when he sees Crusher and there's that look in his eye of he realizes this is my son, because she's basically silently, Kurtzman Trek could never do this, that they were able to, across the room with eye contact only, he was able to say, is he really my son? And her eye contact says, yes, he's your son. And Picard at this very moment says, helm, engage, and he starts the battle. Because up until that point, Picard was kind of in the back seat. He was like, I'm kind of just deferring. I'm making my case, which is better than the first 2 seasons, but he still wasn't taking the lead. From that moment forward, he is taking the lead in this show. And it's continued up and through. And that to me was the number one problem with the first 2 seasons, is that Picard was, honest to God, like a guy who had escaped from the nursing home and was being abused by his grandkids, is how it felt to me. It's like, oh, shut up, old man. You're just, sit down. The adults are talking. And it was awful. I really was like, hey, that's grandpa. I hated it. Well, so he's totally different now.
Yeah. I mean, I'm liking how the older characters are being utilized in the show. I'm liking the new characters and how they're being utilized in the show as well.
Oh yeah.
There's some underlying stuff with Seven of Nine that I'm hoping they get into as well. The Hanson Seven thing. I want a little bit more of what's going on there. I think she sort of touched on it in 6, when she brings up Voyager and she goes into
that was her best
where I was
moment
reborn. Yes. Oh, definitely.
Yeah, she says I was reborn there. Oh, that's a great. I rewatched that moment like 10 times. Literally, I just kept rewinding it again and again and again. Because it wasn't just that Voyager piece, it was that we see the Defiant, and did you catch that they played the DS9 theme when they saw Defiant, and then they played not the Kirk, well, they played the original Kirk theme, but there was even a hint of like the kind of Kirk movie themes buried in there, because I listened to the music, and then they play the Voyager theme, and it was like this beautiful homage to all of those series. And it wasn't in the way Kurtzman does it, where it's like member berries. It was like, this is from the perspective of someone like me who loved these series. And I will say that's the first moment where Seven was like Seven to me. She hasn't seemed like 7 of 9 to me in the first 2 seasons at all. Her performance, sometimes she does the little head tilt thing, which is great. But for some reason, she's dialed in her performance much more in season 3, and probably she's probably settled into the role, but the direction I think is better. And she feels more like the descendant character of who she was in Voyager, right? She's wiser. She's lived 20 more years. She's more human than she was in Voyager, but there's still echoes of the 7 of 9 we know. And I appreciated that.
Yeah, I did as well. I think that it always felt like there were so many scenes missing, so much development missing from her in Picard. Like, how has she gotten to this place now? Oh, she's gay now. Okay, how have we gotten there? We've not explained how we've gotten there. How has this happened?
That bothers me, because they established at the very end of Voyager she was in love with Chakotay. And what bothered me, number one, they haven't resolved that. They have not referenced Chakotay even once, and that does bug the crap out of me. They've referenced Janeway multiple times, which I appreciate, but they have not referenced Chakotay. And it would be fine if they just had one line where she's like, well, Commander Chakotay accepted an assignment and, it just didn't work out. Okay, fine. But to just then throw her in a lesbian romance as an afterthought without even resolving that just bothers me, because it shows me that they did this for identity politics. They didn't do this because it's about developing the character, because they don't give a crap. They don't give a crap about the fact that she was in love with Chakotay. They just want, another scalp for the woke identity politics,
the way I took it was entirely through meta. It's like the same with Icheb. I think they did what they did to Icheb because the actor who originally played him said some stuff about I think it was about the guy who played Stamets, because there was stuff with him and Kevin Spacey, and he said that, so they're like, we're going to punish you vicariously by killing your character brutally.
The actor who played Icheb?
Yes, who is like who is a lot more, I don't know. I guess the word is probably based. Yeah, I don't know.
I guess.
And I can't remember what exactly he said about the guy who played Stamets and Kevin Spacey. But obviously they disagreed with it, and they disagreed with it quite harshly. But it's the same thing with Seven, where I was like, I feel like they're vicariously punishing the audience for finding her attractive in Voyager, because it's like in Voyager they put her in a cat suit.
That's a good point.
I was like, you've got this like blonde busty woman who is very attractive, who's come into this show. You put her in a catsuit. You put her in a catsuit for kind of obvious reasons. But she became a beloved character because of her character more than her sort of frame, shall we say. Well, and I felt like they were going, you horrible mouth-breathing basement dwellers, you were dribbling over her. Yeah. Well, now she's gay, so fuck you. And it felt like that. Yes. And I was like, what? and I'm going, hey, Seven's back. I really love Seven's character. She's gay now. That's weird. She wasn't gay before. Are we going to go into that? Nope.
Yeah, I mean, okay. if they had established that she had never explored relationships, the door would be open for that. But that's not what they did. And oh, well, she's bisexual, you bigot. Oh, shut up. I don't, this is not the point. The point is this had anyway, yeah.
Well, that explanation that point would be great, there. Actually. Like we're saying, like she spent her formative years as a drone, and now she's actually able to explore these things, so she's exploring them. Like that's a fine explanation for that, and they'd be like, okay, fair enough, that's what it is.
Yeah, but you see, again, you as the audience are being invited to have an issue with that, because it's like, oh, well, you should just know. You should just be an enlightened person who's not a bigot and should just understand that. You shouldn't even have to have an explanation, because if you need an explanation, it means you're a bigot. This is what I mean by like woke storytelling is observing you as the audience, because it doesn't feel it owes you anything. You owe something, which is, but I wanted to circle back to that point that you made, because you said, what was that? You made a great point about, oh yeah, they were punishing the audience for finding 7 of 9 hot. The writers flat out said, if you watch the behind the scenes stuff on Voyager, their literal idea was they wanted to do a Borg babe. That was their exact words. We wanted to do a Borg babe. And why not? Like, this is the problem, is that is it one thing? It's one thing to say, okay, we should be a little more careful in just how much we are objectifying women in acting. And it's and I'm okay with that, right? I think everyone should be treated fairly in an industry, but let's not mince words here. Human beings enjoy seeing beautiful people on screen. This goes for men. This goes for women. Women like seeing beautiful women on screen. Men like seeing attractive men on screen. I don't want to see, I don't want to see some like massively overweight, out of shape guy play Kirk. I want to see a fit, guy play Kirk. Like, that's because that's what we want. Well,
unless there's nothing wrong with babes in his later years.
Well, that's a different matter. Yes,
it's in his later years, isn't it?
But look, well, this is why I kind of enjoy, I don't know if you've seen Tulsa King, but one thing I love, it's a little off topic, but Stallone plays this old over the hill mobster, which is cool because he's not trying to play young Rocky, right? It wouldn't be appropriate for him to play the character of a buff, in his prime boxer. He couldn't play that anymore, but he can play a boxer who's an old over the hill retired boxer who's training a new young boxer in Creed, for example. And so Shatner reprising his role as an older, wiser Kirk is fine, but we need to see beautiful people. Like Jack Crusher was obviously the actor Ed Speleers was chosen for that role. Because he's a great actor. He's fantastic. But he's good looking. Sydney, the character that plays Sydney LaForge, she was chosen because she was good. I mean, not only because, but she was all part of why she's cast for that role. She's good looking. There's nothing wrong with that. I
will say now that you bring up Jack, one thing I'm not crazy about as well is we have the storyline of the ex person who is the key to everything. That's crept in a bit.
He's the boy who's the key to everything.
He's the boy who's the key to everything. I'm a bit like, can we not?
Yeah.
I mean,
it is a bit of a trope, I admit.
If it's well executed, I can kind of get past it. But can we not?
I need to see where they're going with this. I am a little tired of this trope of the character that's having visions. I think that's been played out. And even, when I was writing my novels, these tropes, it's hard as a writer. These tropes sink into your consciousness without you even knowing it. Because I started to catch myself doing kind of modern storytelling cliches myself. And I even grappled with this when I wrote my 2 books, Blood and Oak. My character's meant to be a dashing, he's a little bit of an anti-hero. I wrote him to be a little bit rougher around the edges than a Horatio Hornblower or a Jack Aubrey. He's meant to be, he's kind of the American version of a naval hero, which means he's a bit of a rebel. And he kind of bucks the chain of command, and he's got his own mission. And one of the things I struggled with was sometimes I was taking him down too dark a path. His life was becoming too tragic. And I suddenly recognized that some of that was this dystopian mindset that has sunk into modern storytelling. And I had to really be disciplined in saying, I got to make sure I inject the happy into his story. And happy is probably the wrong word, but that what I said before, that lust for life, right? He has a will to live and to enjoy life, and he loves his friends and his crew. And that was important to me to make sure that came through in the character.
That's something that that I've, in my own work as well, that I've been conscious of, is avoiding those tropes, like not making in my fantasy series, which I am about, I'm a matter of sentences from the end of the final book. I'm
awesome. What's your book series?
The Four Guardians is the fantasy series.
Four Guardians.
Indeed.
I must check it out.
So I will, in anticipation of bringing it up, because I've failed so hard to bring it up in many other contexts. So it is going to be, okay, so it's these guys over here. So Out of the Ashes, the Burning Plains,
very cool,
and In the Serpent's Lair. And the fourth one is the Empire of Fire. It's coming soon. Also got a bunch of sci-fi here. The novellas here, the Kodiak books. So you can see Fallen Idol, Dance with the Devil, and Trial by Fire. Those are very Star Trek influenced. Like, to the point, I think maybe it's almost like my own response to what's happening with modern Trek. And I'm like, it's inspired me to just do my own version that earns that optimism. Because I think I wanted to do that story that they completely missed out doing in Discovery. I wanted to have, they're embroiled in this war, and at a certain point, they're going to be out of it, and how are they going to deal with being out of it? And how are we going to find our sort of purpose and our adventurous spirit, the human spirit that's taken us interstellar in this? And it's the same with the fantasy. It's like, the original idea behind that was it's very much sort of resistance movement against tyranny, and we're going to clash, and there's going to be lots of blood, and then it's like, okay, is that the best way to go about that? Well, I mean, there's plenty of that still in it, but how viable is that? Is it like in the geography of the world, I had the countries basically opposite each other on a sort of narrow sea. It's like England and France. There's like a channel between them. And I was like, well, if we, the good guys, kick the bad guys into the sea, the bad guys are just going to go, okay, well, here's more soldiers. We can just replace them with more and more and more. And I'm thinking, like, that's just going to end in like tears for everybody. And how am I going to reconcile this and still come to like a conclusion that's satisfying? And also not have it be just like grim dark, extreme dark fantasy, depression fuel, like Game of Thrones kind of is a bit. Can I do something better with it, or something more?
Well, it's not that I object to dystopian themes or grim themes in storytelling as a matter of principle. If that's the tone and what the story calls for, then that's fine. I think what I object to is that, like, it's being shoved into everything. It's being shoved into the wrong vehicles for it. But if the purpose of the story is to say, hey, what's another way to get at this? I would say you kind of look for the third path. And this is what is always so much fun in well-done storytelling. I think the end of the Dominion War is actually a pretty good example, because that's as irreconcilable a difference as possible. Like, basically the changelings are unpersuadable. There's nothing that could persuade them to ever understand the Federation, and that the Federation is not a threat to them because they view all solids. Essentially, the Dominion is preemptively rising up against what they view as their oppressors, which are solids. And that's why they created the Dominion, right? Which is all very well and good. So there's no way to convince them. Or is there? It turns out Odo, the Changelings' own policy of sending out some of their own into the galaxy to find out new things and explore, resulted in the one individual who could convince them, which was Odo. And so and what's beautiful about that too is that there's the macro level, right? But then this is the thing about Star Trek. Star Trek is a story that is committed to the primacy of the individual and individual liberty. And this is why it's so incompatible with woke ideology, which I would define as, radical leftist ideology based in identity politics, which has decided to employ as its tactics fascism and communism in equal measure. And that is what I view, which is suppression of speech, use of force against anyone that's an enemy, use of indoctrination and propaganda. Like, those are all the tactics, and calling your enemy what you actually are, which is a fascist, right? And so this is what I define as woke broadly. And so that mentality of scorched earth, I am right and you are wrong, is incompatible with Star Trek, because Star Trek doesn't proceed from a collective mindset. It doesn't, it's not concerned with groups. It's not concerned with this group and that group and the power structure between that group and that group. It's concerned with every individual matters. Every individual life has purpose. There's even a great line. Chakotay says this in the episode Year of Hell with Voyager, when the guy is erasing all these civilizations from time, and he's doing it to try and fix the timeline. And he says, well, sometimes life sacrifices have to be made. I have to see the big picture. It's I forget what the bad guy is saying, but he's arguing that like some lives have to be sacrificed. And Chakotay says all those lives are significant. A single life is significant. That's what Star Trek believes. And that's why the new series are so bad at doing Star Trek. And that is, to circle back to what I'm saying here, that's what's so beautiful about Odo's storyline, because Odo is one life, one individual with one specific unique experience, falling in love with Kira, being on Deep Space Nine, having to negotiate the morality of the Bajoran occupation. All of that led him to the moment. Even himself being infected with a disease by Section 31, which is a horrific war crime, visited upon him, arguably, by a leg of the Federation. And his response is to still reach a level of understanding and forgiveness for the Federation because of his friendships within the Federation, and then to extend the olive branch to his own people and convince them. Had Section 31 gotten their way, that peace would not have been possible, because Section 31 was only viewing it at the macro level. So in your own story, what I would suggest is think about how at the macro level, this is inevitable. This is the inevitable result. And then zoom in on something at the individual level that could change all of that. Yeah. I think that's how great stories sort of get at it. They throw you a surprise that's unpredictable.
Yeah.
What's another good example? I would say the way that the Covenant winds up joining with the UNSC in Halo. Some people don't like the Halo game storyline. I kind of like it. Like Halo 3, essentially there's a splinter group of the Covenant that wind up breaking off and joining humanity because they no longer believe that activating the Halos is a good idea. And because of that, they're persona non grata in the Covenant. So the Covenant could never have been defeated except for that event, which changed the political situation. And now the UNSC in the news story, in the forward story, has achieved a level of military supremacy that is just massive. And now the UNSC is truly a force to be reckoned with that it wasn't in the first 3 games. So I think there's ways to get at it where it has to do with what it is it's the unpredictable thing you couldn't have predicted.
Well, Mass Effect, when done well, Mass Effect 3 is full of examples of that. When it's
100%.
executed well. There are times it's not, but
what'd you think of the ending?
Oh gosh.
Extended
I've
cut,
made
yeah.
I've made my peace with it. I've made
Me
my
too.
peace with it.
I've made my peace with it.
I I enjoy the journey too much, I think. And I like it, what you said there with the into those individual moments. I think like ending the Quarian and Geth conflict in that, the way that ends is very much with individuals finding. I mean, the proof of peace is like you have Tally and Legion as the two kind of avatars of their races working together, and that's what it could be. And yeah, I've made my peace with the ending. The less said about it, the better. But I agree. Like the way, yeah, story. It's always fun working out where that's going to happen, and when you get that eureka moment of where it's going to happen in a story, it's like, like when you're writing, where I'm like, there, that's it. That's the key. That moment is where the inflection point where it can blossom and go in a direction that is going to be that is going to lead to that third path effectively.
Yeah, it's and it can be very difficult to get there because you're kind of like you get stuck at the macro level and you're how do I get around this? But the characters can always be the X factor that change what you thought was possible. Yeah, circling back to Mass Effect just for a moment. So I remember the first time I played Mass Effect 3, I had loved every minute of it right up until that ending. And I played the original ending, and the original ending of that game is horrifically bad. It's 30 seconds. It's 30 seconds of a cutscene that explains nothing and resolves nothing and even leaves more questions than answers at the end. And you're like, I just went through this whole epic journey and I don't even get to find out what the hell happened to my characters. And it was absolutely awful. But then they did the extended cut. I will say that was the first time a fan campaign really changed something because they got that's the only time I've ever, as a fan, kind of gone after the creators of something. And I did not in a disrespectful way, but I went on the Mass Effect, the BioWare Facebook page, and I wrote a scathing, like, this is not right. This is just not right. And I said, and it was all very respectful because I said, I loved your games. I love what you've done. And I understand how difficult it is to write an ending. All I am asking is that you consider that this needs more. And I'm not asking for perfect, but I am asking for more than this. And then I actually got an answer, a reply on my comment from the official, Mass Effect. And they just said, we appreciate your feedback, which, which is fine. I appreciate that. And then they came out with the extended cut, and the extended cut fixed a lot of it because it at least offered a resolution. And it offered a few more choices.
Yeah. Well, the DLC as well, like, softened the blow.
Oh, yeah.
Like Leviathan kind of foreshadows it a bit more, and Citadel offers a lot more closure with the characters.
Citadel's great. Love Citadel.
As well, but like on the point of like the fan campaigns, I mean, that is not the first one. The first one would be Star Trek, the original series, which was cancelled after season 2. Yeah, and then it got brought back because of the letter writing. I feel like
that's probably always been a thing when you think about it. It's probably been going back to. I'm sure maybe Alexander Dumas got letters about the Count of Monte Cristo when he was writing.
Maybe Well, it's one of those things where, like, particularly Star Trek has that close relationship. It's like kind of a unique almost relationship with its fandom that you've got to be real careful with if you're a creator. And I feel like with Picard season 3, they realized that. Whereas before they had just gone, who cares?
Well, I think it would be probably more accurate to say that the people that didn't give a shit and will never give a shit ever, Akiva Goldsman and Alex Kurtzman, they realized that the desiccated remains of Star Trek had been plucked clean of everything. There was nothing left for them to get from it. And so they just moved on to their next carcass. And they were happy to just, oh, well, that meal ticket has run its course. I guess we better do something else. And they left it in the hands of someone quite by accident who loved Star Trek. And Terry Matalas, you know, there are so many references to the lore in this, and every time I see one, I get a little bit nervous because I'm like, are you doing this just to bait me? But they do every single time. They pay it off so well. And I was going to say, the character of Shaw, Captain Liam Shaw of the Titan, is the perfect example of how they've corrected everything wrong with Kurtzman Trek. In any other show that Kurtzman and Goldsman are in charge of, Strange New Worlds, Discovery, etc., Shaw would be a villain. He would be an asshole, period. End of sentence. And his whole point in the show would be as a plot device. And he would be being lectured to all the time about how wrong he is about things. And what I like about it is that we are not meant in the show, I think, to generally agree with Shaw because he's in the way of our characters that we really want to take command.
Yeah.
But there's a great phrase, great storytelling is when great drama is when two people are arguing and both are right. And what I like about Shaw is he brings that back. He has good reasons for the way he is. He has good reasons for the points he's making. And sometimes he's kind of right. And sometimes he's making a decision that's like, okay, that's a good call. And he wins us over.
So, he's got clear motivation as well. And his motivation is reasonable. And his issues with Picard are reasonable. To a degree.
Well, they're reasonable even in their unreasonableness. It's totally unfair that he holds it against Picard that he was Locutus of Borg. But by the way, that's just reality. You know, human beings, it's hard. You know, I appreciate that because I think that's a good use of the lore. Because to your point about the inner light, you know, the best of both worlds should be an event that had consequences like that, that rippled out into this world. You know, Sisko didn't like Picard. Sisko had the same feelings about Picard because Sisko lost his wife at the Battle of 359. So it's unfair to Picard that people hold this against him, and yet it's understandable.
Yeah.
And that's why I love his response. You know, Jack starts to intervene to advocate for Picard. And Picard says, no, it's fine. I understand. And by the way, Patrick Stewart's performance of that moment was beautiful. The emotion was so authentic in that moment when he's just like, I understand. I get this all the time. And and he walks out. You can see how painful it is for him, but at the same time, he is also empathizing with Shaw. He's empathizing with, if I were you, I'd probably feel the same way. So I'm not going to fight you. And by the way, something I got to say about Jack Crusher. This is the thing. Jack Crusher in any other Kurtzman property, well, in any other Kurtzman run show, would have been, how can I put this? He would have been a dystopian character because right off the bat, and this was why I did not like Crusher in the first episode, and I was only
first two.
I was cautiously warming up to him in the second episode, and this is why, because every character who's a rogue-like character in the past would have been kind of out for himself, kind of selfish, and ultimately would have been bagging on Starfleet philosophy, would have been bagging at a meta level, would have been bagging on Star Trek, quite frankly. He would have been talking about, you're all out here, you know, gallivanting around the galaxy. It's all quite boring. You know, he would have had this dismissive, negative, pardon my terrible accent impression. He would have been dismissing everything about the world in a kind of meta way, which is what characters like this always, it's that Marvel MCU humor thing where they have to make fun of all the stupidity of these characters in this show. And he also would have been bagging on Picard at every opportunity. He would have been shaming Picard. He would have been hating on Picard for being the absentee father. What I like about this is that he does have some of those elements. He's a bit selfish, a bit out for himself. He's also a citizen of the Federation. And as I mentioned again and again, even the worst of the Federation are still pretty good people. And so that's what I like about him. He is a rogue who's out for himself, but he's Jack Crusher. He will give Picard the benefit of the doubt, and he will actually start to be convinced by Picard at certain points that, like, yeah, maybe you're not such a bad guy. Maybe you have a point. And he's even starting to like Starfleet a little bit. And I appreciate all that about him.
Yes, definitely. In episode 6, you can tell he gets it. Like, he understands what they're doing, and it seems like he has some sort of respect for it. And I think that's, yeah, I'm happy with. He has grown on me, Jack. He has grown on me. I was worried in episode 2 when he was talking about like the kind of weapon smuggling and things. I was a bit like, what are we doing? Where are we going with this?
But he's doing it to help people, which
yes, definitely. Well, it definitely seems like it. Yeah, well, because he's
delivering
medicine.
Analog. Chakotay and B'Elanna in Voyager are kind of good analogs for the way they're doing Jack Crusher, because Chakotay is in the technical definition in the world, he's a terrorist, right? Chakotay is but really he's a freedom fighter, but he was a Starfleet officer. And so the point about Chakotay is, even though he's an outlaw, he's still a moral man.
Yeah,
and he still cares.
A clear code of ethics. And
so does Jack Crusher.
So does Jack, yeah.
And that's why I love. And by the way, I'm totally shipping Jack and Sydney. I am a Jack and Sydney shipper now. I think that moment between them when they kind of have those sparks, it was adorable, and I'm like, oh yes, please let this happen. I'm so excited.
And LaForge's reaction to it as well was great.
Oh yeah, stay away from my daughter. By the way, this is another great example. Sydney has this moment where LaForge is telling her, yeah, you're going to be transferred off the ship. You're going to be out of harm's way. And she's like, no, I'm not going. This is my crew. And they have this argument. And in the Kurtzman way of doing this, she would have been right about everything. LaForge would have been a toxic father trying to control his daughter, patriarchy. And she would have been there to educate him, because the young generation is enlightened and the old farts need to shut the hell up. They're a bunch of bigots, and they need to stop lecturing the young people, especially the young female people, about things. That scene was not portrayed that way at all. It was portrayed as he was a concerned father. He was wrong because he was trying to undermine her choice as an adult to make her own decisions about putting herself in harm's way. And he was interfering with that in a way that truly was not appropriate for the chain of command, and was overprotective for a father, but was also very understandable because he loves his daughter and he doesn't want her to die. And that's just reality. And she was deferential to that in the scene. She understood why he was trying to do this, but she was standing her ground and saying, no, father, this is my choice, not yours. Yep. This is what I'm going to do. And this is the choice you would have made when you were my age. Yeah. And that is showing respect for him. She's respecting him in that scene, even though she's angry with him and in disagreement, which to me is a real loving relationship between parent and child, in that
I feel like
there's right and wrong on both sides, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah. I mean, there's an even better example of that later when he's either fixing the cloaking device or he's fixing Data, where he's like asked for a tool and she hands him the correct one. And I was like, oh, don't do it. I could tell it was like, this could be I bypassed the compressor moment. And I was
you're right.
And she went, the reason I crashed all those ships, because they're known as Crash and Forge, the reason I crashed all those so I could spend time with you and I learned from you. And it's like, okay, all right, good. You steered out of the potential skid. But it's that moment, it's that thing of, you're my dad, I've been learning from you. Having a positive father figure in a modern show is crazy, isn't it?
It's amazing. And by the way, LaForge is portrayed as successful.
Yes.
He's portrayed as a successful man, a successful leader, and a successful father. And a father worthy of respect, even though he's wrong in this one situation. And notice also, she did have that moment of like, no, you mean this tool. why are we also willing to forgive that? Because just before that, she's brilliant. She's a brilliant engineer. Well, she's a brilliant officer, let's say. Mm-hmm. And she's trying to make the cloaking device work, and she can't, and it's failing. And Jack can't figure it out either. And then LaForge, and she says, we got to do this, but I can't. And then LaForge comes in, he's like, but I can. And he takes command. He's like, now you over there and stay away from my daughter. And he fixes it.
Yeah.
So there's a give and a take, right? There's a balance. There are moments where LaForge is quite literally he is wiser. He's more accomplished. He knows what he's doing. And yes, there's moments where he's human and he screws up. That's fine. Nobody has ever said that we wanted all the men in one of these shows to be portrayed as beyond reproach. That would be stupid. That would be bad storytelling. That's why the whole girl boss thing is so bad, because it portrays all women as being beyond reproach, which is stupid. That's not reality. That's bad storytelling. Humans are humans, regardless of their, well, this is a weird concept. It's almost as if, regardless of our gender, we all have flaws and we all have strengths. And this is all good storytelling is. It is a authentic portrayal of human relationships. And in a human relationship, there's give and take. And what was the other thing? With LaForge, he's not a sad sack. Neither is Riker. Neither is almost anyone else in this show. Crusher is doing doctor stuff. She's actually a doctor who's treated, and she even sounds like her old self on the show, which kind of blew me away. I expected her in that first episode. She's shooting people. She's running around a ship, and I thought, this is not Crusher. This is not. She's a spy. What?
Yeah.
But it turns out that no, she's still a doctor. She's just on this kind of unusual mission.
Right. And I think, like, the core, for me, the core of a story is its characters. You've got to get them right. If you can get people right, you can tell a good story with them. You get their idiosyncrasies right. You get their attitudes right. You get where they're coming from right. And you can tell something that's grounded with them, and something that you can engage in, because you recognize the qualities in them, and you recognize where they kind of complement and where they clash and why they clash. And that's sort of the core of the drama that can exist within these stories. And I feel like getting that wrong, which so many modern properties seem to do, is why it all falls apart so readily. You just got to get that right. Like, they've got the they've got the characters right. It feels like the people we know are the people we know. And the people we didn't know at the start of this show are all recognizable people who we can relate to and who are clearly presented. Not even necessarily with words.
It's almost as if every character has earned our investment. You know, I despise the character of Paul Stamets in Discovery. I absolutely despise him, because he is the most stereotypical gay character, and he is there to represent the appropriate gay character, and he's meant to represent all the things about gay people you are meant to celebrate and like. And that's what all of his and he's always the one lecturing people about things, which I really dislike. And it's like, why can't he just be a man who has his own personality and character? And this is one aspect of his personality that we're not reminded of every 10 seconds. You know what I mean?
It did seem like a stereotype, which was weird. Like, the thing is, like, when I watched the episodes of Discovery I watched, I was like, I don't necessarily mind this guy, because he's acerbic, he's got, like, his personality, and it was just kind of witty. I'm like, okay, I don't hate this guy. I don't hate him as much as, I mean, maybe it's because he had a character as opposed to most of the other people on the ship. But I can see that turning. Yeah. I can see him not necessarily growing or changing within the story.
He doesn't.
And becoming that stereotype.
I guess my point with the character is that I feel an unspoken pressure that I must like this character. You know what I mean? It's like there's this feeling that, like, I have to like this character because A, he's gay. So if I don't like him, that means that I'm a bigot. But also he's smug. He's very smug all the time. And there's a kind of like assumption, I think, on the part of the writers that you're getting. Raffi, frankly, is the same thing. Raffi is this character you are assumed that you're going to like. And it's like, no, I don't know this person. I don't know this character. She needs to earn my reason to like her. All characters do. All characters do. I hated Neelix. In the beginning of Star Trek Voyager, I hated that character. He was annoying as hell. And I thought, but the funny thing was, slowly but surely, he started to like earn little moments in the show where it was like, well, maybe Neelix has a point. Maybe Neelix has a good role on the ship. And by the end of it, the ending to his story in Voyager moved me to tears, because he chooses to stay in the Delta Quadrant with this new family of Talaxians, and the whole crew gives him this amazing heartfelt send-off, and it's beautiful. And it's amazing to me how a character that annoyed me at first was able to earn my love. But that is the reality. As a writer, the problem with woke writers is they're arrogant. They're like fan fiction writers, and that everything they do is about wish fulfillment. Everything they do is about, this is what I believe is right. This is what I believe the world is. This is how people should think. And it's like, dude, I don't care. I have a worldview, but when I'm writing my characters, my attitude is I should have characters in this that challenge my worldview. Because if I don't, it means I'm a hack, basically. If I can't write a character that adamantly disagrees with me, and yet I am able to portray that character with nuance and depth and redeemable qualities, if I'm not able to do that, how am I supposed to write complex characters? And I literally sometimes write characters to literally argue with my own worldview, persuasively, by the way, not just, oh, I'm going to portray the straw man argument that I can knock down. It's like, no, I literally want this character to make an argument that might persuade me. And I view that as my duty as a writer, is that every character should have something about them that I disagree with. And every character should have something about them that's likable. The villains also, the villains should have persuasive arguments. The villains should have, if not justifiable reasons, they should have good reasons for the things they're doing most of the time. Depends on the character, of course, but generally speaking, I find
justifiable to them, definitely.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it. Like, we should see from their perspective how they're justifying their odious behavior. So this is why I object to the character of like a Paul Stamets or a Raffi, because they were written into the show with an attitude. And to go back to that moment in the last episode where Worf and Riker are walking through the Daystrom station, and they're kind of having this fun little argument that's actually very enjoyable, and I'm enjoying it. Raffi jumps in and says, boys, can we just stay focused? Two things I hate about this. Number one, that's a cliche. Right. Yes. That is a basic bitch writing cliche of like, oh, I need to move the plot forward, so this character will interrupt the dialogue so that I don't have to write a convincing ending to this dialogue that moves the story forward. So that is a trick. That's a trick that writers play. And look, even good writers, I'm certainly not beyond those types of cliches on occasion, but it is a cliche. Secondly, do I really need to see my legendary heroes being lectured to by a newbie? That's my issue with it. Leaving aside Raffi, leaving aside any other aspect of it, it's like, no. These are the OGs you're talking to.
Yep. And
the OGs are talking. So while the OGs are talking, the new characters can just kindly shut up, because I'm not here for them. And this is why I like what they've done with Jack and Sydney are done well, because they're not intruding on the OGs. They are slowly but surely earning their place among the OG characters, but they are never stepping on them. Yes, they disagree with them. Yes, they have smart, clever ideas because they're youthful and they're more full of energy and they're willing to take bigger risks, which is good. That's appropriate. But there are times when it's like, okay, now the adults are in charge. Riker's in charge now. It's time to listen to him. And you love DS9, so this is a great example. Remember the episode where there's another Defiant sister ship that's out there? I forget the name of it, but there's a crew of cadets that are the Valiant, yes. And there's a crew of cadets running it, and Jake and Nog wind up stuck on that ship, and they're the best of the best. Like, they're the elite cadets in Starfleet, and they are able to do extraordinary things for young people, but they're still very, very young. They're basically teenagers, and they're out fighting the Dominion. and they should be coming home. And most of that episode is they are making increasingly more dangerous mistakes. They're making increasingly stupid plans. They are taking on enemies that are increasingly, because they are full of cocky, unearned confidence. And Jake is the voice of reason in the episode, because he's saying, look, my father is, Captain Sisko. He's a most decorated combat officer in the fleet right now. He wouldn't do this. And I don't think we should be doing this. And the young cocky commander shuts him down. And it ends in disaster, right? The Valiant gets destroyed. Jake and Nog have to escape in an escape pod. And then there's this moment at the very end where the real Defiant comes in, and we see the crew of Sisko and Worf and Kira, and they're all on the bridge. And now it's like the adults are back, and you can feel the shift in tone. Suddenly you're hearing professionals speaking. You're hearing seasoned, well-trained professionals talking to each other. And there's a feeling of relief you get, because they rescue Jake and Nog, like, oh, thank God. Oh, that's what I'm talking about. It's like these young people were smart and they were good, but they didn't know what they were doing, and it got them killed. That's what this season of Picard is bringing back. The young people are smart. They're skilled. There's a reason they're there. But there's shit they don't know that could still get them killed. And they need to listen when Riker and Picard and Shaw are talking.
And they are. That's kind of the main thing.
And they are.
They are. Yes. They are reverent to that. And even part of what's improving Raffi is that she has been doing that with Worf.
Yes.
Until episode 6, where that happened. But there's still a lot. There's still a lot that needs to be done with her, but they're moving in the right direction, I think.
She lost a lot. She was slowly building some love for me because of that. She was being deferential to Worf. Yes, she was snarky with him, but that's her character. I was hating her less, and I was getting to the point where I could see a version of myself where I almost like this character. And then she said that stupid line, and I was like, okay, I hate this character. I hate Raffi. I mean, they could have. Why didn't they keep?
It's like she reminds you that she's Raffi. While you're like, I know this character's okay. Oh no, well, it's Raffi, of course.
I mean, I would almost say, why pick her as the holdover from the last seasons? But then I think of Rios might be the only other one I could see being a good holdover, but yeah, it probably wouldn't work because he himself is a commander, so probably would just be too many cooks. It's fine. I can live with Raffi. I can live with her. But the problem with Raffi is, and I said this before, she was so disrespectful to the character of Picard in the first season, and the disrespect was at more the meta level, which is, from our perspective as fans of Star Trek Next Generation, we know Picard, and we have reverence for this character. And then suddenly he shows up in the desert with Raffi, and she's talking to him like he's an idiot. And the problem with this is we don't know her. It would be one thing if he showed up in the desert and it was Ro Laren and she's talking to him like an idiot. Now that would be different, because we'd go, oh, that's Ro. I remember, and they were at odds. And by the way, Ro comes back and it works. But that would have been okay, because we would have been like, okay, that is a somewhat OG character talking to an OG character, and we understand the relationship, and we can have that quick investment. Problem is, with an unknown like Raffi, I don't know who this lady is, and she can kindly shut the fuck up. Like, this is Picard. Who is she to talk? And then she's thank God they dropped this thing where she called him JL. Oh, that pissed me off. Yeah. I hated that.
Yeah.
So this is my problem with Raffi. She didn't earn any of the show's clear, and this is true. This is what Discovery suffers from. This is what Strange New World suffers from. You are assumed to find these characters clever and delightful, and all I find them to be is odious, detestable, snarky, and annoying.
Yeah, the show tells you, like this person, and doesn't give you a reason to like them. And that's
like Stamets is the worst example of that for me.
Yeah.
But not just to pick on Stamets. I hated Tilly. Oh my God, I hate Tilly so much.
Yeah. I don't know how she made it through the academy. It's another one where I was like, okay, I mean, I'm going by like the first 4 episodes. I was like, okay, well, this is a person who isn't grimdark, who's kind of a bit like, I'm like, all right, this is a character okay, fine. We'll see where she goes. I mean, I didn't see like the way her arc went, and the same with
I get what you're
Stamets, I don't
saying.
know.
I think if you watched it longer, you'd start to come around to my point of
Yeah,
but,
I do know that she ends up being quite high ranking and ends up disobeying orders all the time. I know I have seen the "this is so fucking cool" line, which makes me die.
It is fucking cool. Ugh.
Yeah, which makes me completely die. And
so a friend of mine has a theory that really what's happened is all the jocks that used to make fun of us for liking Star Trek have stolen all of our shit, and now they're running it, and they're stuffing us back in the locker as toxic fans, right? And it's like, shut up, toxic fan. I'm going to give you a wedgie, toxic fan. And it's like, because their attitude of these characters, and Tilly and Stamets they're like the perfect storm of this, because whenever those two are in a scene together, that is the worst Discovery gets, believe me. And it's exactly like that scene where she's like, "That's fucking cool." "Oh, I'm sorry, Commander." He's like, "No, you're right. That is fucking cool." And this is not the attitude of Starfleet officers. They are not out there having a big old fun time. Like, they're professionals doing a job. You know, it goes back to like Sisko, Kira, Janeway, Chakotay. These are veteran people with a serious job to do. And by the way, it's dangerous as hell out there. And you can't go around acting like an idiot. And the reason I hate Tilly is not because, look, she's perky and she's happy. And this is my problem. They're misunderstanding what optimism and storytelling is. They're misunderstanding what utopia is. It's not that people are happy. Worf is a very dark character. He always has been. Worf is a character that lives by a code of death and honor. So it is not to say that every character is peppy and happy in the Star Trek universe. It is to say that characters in Starfleet have a high standard of moral behavior. And secondly, that they are part of a meritocracy.
Yeah.
That is the crucial piece that's missing. Tilly in a meritocracy cannot be in Starfleet. She's an idiot. She's unprofessional. She is out of shape. She's not in good physical condition. She's not, like, these are not the qualities that you should see in a Starfleet officer. And there's one character in Enterprise I think is a fair example of an unqualified person in Starfleet who kind of earns their way in, and that's Hoshi.
Yeah.
Because Hoshi is a brilliant linguist, but she's not a very good Starfleet officer, and that is known right in the beginning. And but Archer needs her. He has no choice. He's like, "I'm going to the Klingon homeworld. I have to have you on this mission." And so, against kind of the official judgment of Starfleet, he brings her in as a senior officer, and she has space sickness. She has fears and phobias. She struggles to even go on an away mission, and it's kind of almost disastrous at times. And Archer has to really work to keep her mentally able to be on the final frontier. And eventually she does. Eventually she becomes a really good officer by the end of the show. And this is what's so great about how that was done, is she illustrates what happens when someone who's not ready is out there on the final frontier. And only because of how necessary her expertise was did she get away with that. But no one else would have got away with that.
Conversely, with like the eagerness, you have someone like Scotty who loves every aspect of what he does, but he is eager about it and he enjoys it. And someone like Chekhov as well, who is full of beans and full of vigor and is like very kind of emotive and joyful, and they are both consummate professionals at the same time.
Yes,
it's like they both are very, very good at what they're good at, and they're consummate professionals, so they don't stick out like a sore thumb like Tilly does.
Well, and of course, much has been said about the crying on Star Trek Discovery, but it seriously is that bad. Characters break down in tears in front of each other constantly on that show and talk through tears all the time. And that show has ruined Sonequa Martin Green for me. Like, I can't stand to look at her anymore. I liked her casting at first on paper, and I thought, because I liked her in Walking Dead, she was great on that show. To watch her literally, "I'm so proud of you," every 10 seconds, I can't take it. This is not how a Starfleet officer behaves. This is pathetic. It's embarrassing. You know who one of my favorite all-time characters is, by the way, Major Kira.
Very emotional
Major
character.
Kira. Yes.
But done right.
Yes, exactly my point. Major Kira is one of my I would say on DS9 she's my favorite character. I have a favorite on every Data's my favorite on TNG, and yeah, so the Doctor is my favorite on Voyager. Actually, Kira is my favorite on DS9 because her story is so human and so powerful, because she was this resistance fighter. War was all she ever knew. She literally had to survive on her aggression, on her ability to fight authority and fight everything. And now suddenly she has to be part of civilization. And not just any civilization, a very enlightened Federation civilization. And this is very hard for her. And there's so many adorable and like sweet moments with her. Like when Quark is trying to trick her to go into the holodeck, because she'll never go in a holodeck. And so he comes up with this, because he needs a scan of her for his nefarious reasons. And he comes up with this ruse, which is that she has won something. So she comes in the door. Oh, you're our 100th customer. You're our 1000th customer. You just won a free holodeck. You won this thing. And there's this moment. She's like, shut up, Quark. What is this about? And he's like, no, I'm serious. You won something. And she's like, really? It's like, yeah, it's the 1000th customer. It's you. And she's like, well, I've never won anything before. He's like, what did I? She's like, what did I win? Oh, you won this bottle of spring wine, and you won this, and you won a free trip to the holodeck. I don't want a holodeck. But I love that moment because it shows how she spent so many years in the trenches, and like war and survival and tragedy was so much all she ever knew, that this little moment of just living life and just winning a raffle is like fun to her suddenly. But she's new to it. That's why I love her character. She has so many moments, and she has spirituality. She has a religion. Her faith is a beautiful part of her character.
It's another thing that like being sheltered and not having those experiences.
Yes,
not needs to, but can be explored as 7 of 9 as well, and was a little bit in Voyager, and can be still. I think we've been going. This is comfortably the longest one I've ever done. Longest Tavern episode.
My power hasn't been shut off yet, so
not yet. Not yet. Good. But I tell you, we will. I think what we'll do, we'll wrap it up there, because I feel like this one is going to. I'm just going to have to title it. We just talk about Star Trek the entire time.
Which is fine with me.
Which is absolutely fine with me.
I could go on with let's just close with it, because I'm just curious. So, Star Trek Picard season 3, with what 1 out of 10 so far? Where would you put it?
Oh, from 1 to 10. Okay, so far, I mean, in totality, from 1 to 6, I would put it at about a 7 currently.
Now, so 1 to 6.
Yeah, from episode 1 to 6, I'd put it at a 7.
Oh, okay, that's what you meant. You put it at 7. Yeah. Okay, got it. That for a minute, I was like, oh, we're changing the scale. So for episodes 1 to 6, yes, I would say I'm at about a 9. Okay. And I hold back a point because there are still little things I don't like the little Raffi moment. Oh, boys, we got to move on. Yeah. Also, there's something about the visual effects in New Trek that's a little saccharine to me. It doesn't feel like real space. You watch the movie Interstellar, and it's like you're really in space, and it's incredible. And I don't get that from this show. But the ship design, beautiful. So they win me back there. Star Trek Picard seasons 1 and 2, how would you rate 1 to 10?
See, I didn't watch any of 2. I mean, from what I saw of season 1, which is just 1 episode, I mean, it'd be like a 2. I guess.
Yeah, for me,
and I don't know where those
10.
2 points are coming from. Like zero felt too strong, but I think maybe because they start in the vineyard and he calls his dog number 1. I think that's probably the only things that brought it up to a 2.
Yeah, you stopped early enough to not get to where I'm at, which is it's a -10. It's the those 2 seasons are the worst 2 Star Trek things ever made, in my opinion.
Discovery's a 0. That's a flat 0 for me.
Yeah. Strange New Worlds gets a 2. I'll give Strange New Worlds a 2. it has one character I like that is roughly reminiscent of Star Trek in how it used to be.
Mm. Well, it needs that because it is Star Trek. It needs something that. All right. So, where can people find you? Where can people support, connect, get in touch with you, etc.?
Yes, absolutely. So my YouTube channel is Swords and Starships. I am Captain Garrett, the host. Swords and Starships. You can find me there. Movie reviews, and also I have a locals page. Swordsandstarships.locals.com. I'm looking to build a community. You can interact with me directly there. It's pretty new. I am going to have exclusive content on there eventually. So I would love a follow on locals if you're there. I also am on Rumble, but that's where I would go. The main channel is YouTube, and I am doing reviews, trying to do at least 3 to 5 videos a week. I have not done well this week with that, but I'm also doing live streams on Thursday and Sunday evenings. So when I can.
And of course,
those are my books on Amazon. Blood and Oak are my 2 sword and sails historical high seas adventures. And I'm also working on a new sci-fi series as well. So if you follow me on locals and YouTube, you will hear more about that soon.
Superb. All right. Well, you can find me obviously here at the Alchemy Lab. Good grief. We have a new logo, which you'll have seen, a new thumbnail thing for the channel, which is the logo of the Alchemy game system, which is coming very, very soon. You can find me at minds.com, at Matt Waterhouse Author. You can find my books on Amazon. Check them out. Finale of the 4 Guardians series coming very soon. If you like Star Trek, check out Kodiak. If you like cosmic horror, peculiar kind of out there stuff, check out Red Saints, check out The Eye of the Universe, which are my 2 sci-fi offerings. But until then, Garrett, thank you for coming on. It has been a joy to talk about Star Trek this much. It's one of my favorite things to discuss.
It was wonderful. Yeah, thanks for having me, Matt, and great conversation. And yeah, anytime you want to chop it up about Star Trek, I am your man.
All right, sounds good. I may cut this one in half and release it in 2 bits, or I might just chuck it all out. I don't know. We'll see, and we'll see what happens. So take care, everyone, and I'll see you next time.